freedom when it actually meant something. You watched America go from one nation under God to a nation that kicks God out of schools, celebrates perversion, and calls good evil and evil good. And now, as you study biblical prophecy with the urgency that comes from knowing your time on earth is limited, you're asking the question that haunts every patriot who's lived long enough to see the decline. Where is America when the Antichrist rises to power? The silence from prophecy teachers is deafening. They'll tell you about Russia, China, and Israel. They'll map out Ezekiel 38 and Revelation 16. But when you ask about the nation you fought for, the nation you pledged allegiance to, the nation that was supposed to be a city on a hill, they change the subject. I won't, because you deserve the truth. And the truth is more devastating and more urgent than most pastors have the courage to tell you. Right now, at this very moment, the final pieces are being positioned for a war that makes World War II look like a border skirmish. Moscow is building the exact coalition Ezekiel described 1,600 years ago. Beijing is mobilizing an army so massive that Revelation gives us the specific number: 200 million troops. The Middle East is one match strike from exploding into the war that ends all wars. And America? America is either about to collapse before the tribulation begins, be absorbed into the Antichrist's global government, or play a role so minor that Scripture doesn't even bother mentioning it by name. You didn't fight in Vietnam, serve during the Cold War, or stand ready during Desert Storm, so your grandchildren could grow up under the reign of the beast. You didn't defend constitutional freedoms, so the next generation could willingly surrender them for a digital mark on their right hand or forehead. But here's what your military training prepared you for that you didn't realize. This isn't over. The final battle hasn't been fought, and your generation, the last generation that remembers when America was great, when churches were full, when men were men, and truth was truth, you have one last mission. Not a physical mission. Most of you can't run to the mountains or fight in the trenches anymore. Your knees are shot. Your back hurts. Your doctor has you on medications that didn't even exist when you were young. But spiritual warfare has no age limit. Prayer is more powerful than any weapon you ever carried. And the legacy you leave your grandchildren in the next few years will determine whether they survive what's coming or take the mark and damn themselves for eternity. Let me be blunt about something most prophecy teachers won't say. This video isn't for everyone. It's not for people looking for entertainment. It's not for casual Christians who want their ears tickled. It's not for young people who think they have decades to figure this out. This is for you, the man or woman who's lived long enough to see the pattern, who remembers what America used to be, who's watched the moral foundation crumble year after year, who wakes up at 3 a.m. wondering what kind of world your grandchildren will inherit. You're 55, 65, 75, maybe older. You've buried friends. You've attended funerals. You really know that your time on this earth is limited, and that knowledge creates urgency that younger people simply don't have. They think they have time. You know better. And here's what else you know that they don't. You've seen prophecy fulfilled in your lifetime. If you're old enough, you remember 1948, the year Israel became a nation again, after 2,000 years of non-existence. You might have read about it in the newspaper, heard it on the radio. I thought it was interesting, but didn't understand the prophetic significance. But now you do. Now you understand that you witnessed the impossible. A nation dead and scattered for 2 millennia, reborn in a single day. Exactly as Isaiah 66:8 predicted. Who has ever heard of such things? Who has ever seen things like this? Can a country be born in a day, or a nation be brought forth in a moment? You saw it happen. You lived through the fulfillment of prophecy that seemed impossible for 2,000 years. If you're a little younger, you remember 1967, the Six-Day War. You watched Israel, surrounded by hostile Arab armies that outnumbered them 10 to 1. Not just survive, but conquer. You saw Jerusalem return to Jewish control for the first time since 70 AD, another impossible prophecy fulfilled. You remember 1973, the Yom Kippur War, Egypt and Syria launching a surprise attack on Israel's holiest day. The first 48 hours looked like Israel would be destroyed, but somehow, miraculously, they survived. Again, your generation has witnessed more prophetic fulfillment than any generation since the apostles. And because you've lived long enough to see the impossible happen multiple times, you know something that younger skeptics don't believe. The rest of it is coming too. The tribulation, the Antichrist, the mark, the final battle. It's not symbolic. It's not allegorical. It's coming as literally as Israel came back, as certainly as Jerusalem was recaptured. And it's coming soon, possibly in your lifetime. Think about that. You may live to see the Antichrist rise to power. You may witness the abomination of desolation. You may be alive when nations gather at Armageddon. You may see Christ return. That possibility should change everything about how you're living right now. But before we get to what you should do, we need to address the question that's eating at you. The question you're almost afraid to ask out loud because the answer might break your heart. Where is America in biblical prophecy? You love this country. You served it. Maybe you bled for it. You saluted the flag and meant it. You believed in what America stood for: liberty, justice, constitutional government, individual freedom. You believed America was exceptional, a nation founded on biblical principles, a beacon of hope to the world, and you're watching it die. Not quickly, not in some dramatic collapse, but slowly, deliberately. Death by 1,000 compromises, death by moral decay, death by abandoning the very foundations that made it great. You've watched the Supreme Court remove prayer from schools, legalize abortion, redefine marriage. You've seen the 10 Commandments stripped from courthouses. The Bible was removed from classrooms, God's name erased from public life. You've watched entertainment go from wholesome to toxic, from Leave It to Beaver to Drag Queen Story Hour, from I Love Lucy to Netflix, pushing every perversion imaginable. You've watched education go from teaching reading, writing, and arithmetic to indoctrinating children in critical race theory and gender ideology. Your grandchildren come home from school confused about basic biology, hating their country, and questioning their identity. You've watched the military you served go from the most respected institution in America to a woke social experiment. They're more concerned with pronouns than preparedness, more focused on diversity than lethality. And recruitment is collapsing because young men don't want to serve in an institution that hates them for being masculine. You've watched the church, the institution that was supposed to stand firm, compromise on everything. Denominations that preached the gospel when you were young now celebrate Pride Month. Pastors who should be warning about judgment instead preach therapeutic deism. Churches that should be full are empty, and the ones that are full often preach everything except the cross. And you've watched politics devolve into insanity. A president who can't complete a coherent sentence. A border that's not a border anymore. Cities that have become war zones. An economy that's destroying the middle class. A justice system that punishes political opponents and releases violent criminals. This isn't the America you grew up in. This isn't the America you fought for. And deep down, you know it's not coming back. That's a hard truth to accept. Because you're a patriot. You love your country. You want to believe it can be saved. You want to think that if we just elect the right president, appoint the right judges, pass the right laws, we can turn it around. But you've been hearing that for 40 years, and it keeps getting worse. Reagan slowed the decline, but he didn't reverse it. Bush promised 1,000 points of light, but the darkness spread. Trump fought back, but the swamp is still there, deeper than ever. And here's what you need to understand. America's decline isn't primarily political. It's spiritual, and spiritual problems don't have political solutions. Romans 1 describes the pattern. When a nation rejects God, he gives them over. First to sexual immorality, then to shameful lusts, finally to a depraved mind. You've watched America go through all three stages in your lifetime. The sexual revolution of the 1960s, given over to sexual immorality. The LGBTQ+ movement, given over to shameful lusts. Transgender insanity and everything happening now, given over to a depraved mind. This isn't a random cultural shift. This is divine judgment. God removed his hand of protection and let a nation that rejected him experience the consequences of that rejection. And here's the part that connects to prophecy. When God judges a nation this thoroughly, that nation doesn't usually survive to play a major role in future events. Look at biblical history. Egypt was a superpower. Where is it in the end times? Barely mentioned. Babylon ruled the known world. Gone. Persia, Greece, Rome, all dominant in their day, all reduced to footnotes or completely absent in end times prophecy. Nations rise and fall according to God's purposes, and when they've served their purpose and abandoned their calling, he removes them from the stage. What if America's purpose was to protect Israel's rebirth, to provide a safe haven for Jewish refugees in the early 20th century, to ensure Israel had support and weapons to survive its early wars, to give the church a platform to send missionaries and spread the gospel globally for 200 years? What if we've fulfilled our purpose? And what comes next is judgment, collapse, and removal from prophetic significance? That's not anti-American, that's biblical. God is not an American. His purposes don't center on preserving the United States. They center on his glory, his people, and ultimately his son's return. And if America has to fall for that plan to unfold, then America will fall. I know that's hard to hear, especially for those of you who wore the uniform, who stood guard in Korea, Vietnam, Germany, the Middle East, who believed you were defending something worth dying for. You were, at the time, but times change, nations change, and God's purposes move forward regardless. But here's what you need to understand before despair sets in. Your citizenship was never primarily American anyway. Philippians chapter 3:20 settles it. But our citizenship is in heaven, and we eagerly await a Savior from there, the Lord Jesus Christ. You can love America without making it an idol. You can grieve its decline without losing hope, because your hope was never supposed to rest in a nation, any nation, but in a kingdom that cannot be shaken. And that kingdom has an army that never loses, an army that will fight the final battle and win decisively, an army led by a king who returns not as a suffering servant, but as a conquering warrior. Revelation 19:11-16 describes him. I saw heaven standing open, and there before me was a white horse, whose rider is called Faithful and True. With justice he judges and wages war. His eyes are like blazing fire, and on his head are many crowns. He has a name written on him that no one knows but he himself. He is dressed in a robe dipped in blood, and his name is the Word of God. The armies of heaven were following him, riding on white horses, and dressed in fine linen, white and clean. Coming out of his mouth is a sharp sword with which to strike down the nations. He will rule them with an iron scepter. He treads the winepress of the fury of the wrath of God Almighty. On his robe and on his thigh he has this name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. That's your commander-in-chief, not the man in the Oval Office, not any earthly authority, Jesus Christ, the warrior king. And when he returns, it won't be to establish American democracy or restore constitutional government. It'll be to destroy every earthly kingdom and establish his own. Daniel 2:44 prophesied it. In the time of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will it be left to another people. It will crush all those kingdoms and bring them to an end, but it will itself endure forever. So yes, America might fall, probably will fall. But the kingdom you actually belong to, that kingdom is eternal, unshakable, guaranteed. And here's the mission for your remaining years. Stop trying to save America. You can't. It's too far gone. The judgment is too advanced. The moral rot is too deep. Instead, save your family. Warn your grandchildren. Prepare them for what's coming. Teach them that their citizenship is in heaven. Show them what it looks like to stand firm when everything around you is collapsing. Because while America may not stand against the Antichrist, individual believers will. While the nation may fall, the faithful remnant will endure. While the government may bow to the beast, your grandchildren can refuse. But only if you teach them how. Only if you model it now. Only if you stop placing your hope in political solutions and start building their faith on the solid rock of Christ. And to do that effectively, you need to understand what's actually coming. Not vague tribulation theology, not symbolic interpretations, but concrete, specific, biblically grounded understanding of which nations will stand against the Antichrist, why they'll fight, and what that means for believers trying to survive. In the sections ahead, we're going to examine Russia's coalition, forming right now, exactly as Ezekiel predicted, preparing to invade from the north. China's army, 200 million troops mobilizing in the east, just as Revelation described. Islamic forces, the king of the south that Daniel foresaw, already hostile and preparing for jihad. Israel's betrayal, the nation at the center of it all, making a covenant with the Antichrist that leads to the final war. The final battle, Armageddon, where all these forces converge and Christ ends human rebellion forever. And most importantly, your role. What you can do right now, at your age, with your limitations, to fulfill the mission God has for your final years. Because you're not done yet. You're not too old. You're not irrelevant. You're the generation that's seen more, understands more, and has less time to waste than any other. You're the veterans of life's battles, and the final battle is approaching. Not physical combat for most of you, but spiritual warfare determines eternal destinies. So lock in, pay attention, because what you're about to learn in the next 2 hours will change how you see current events, how you pray, how you teach, and how you prepare for the moment when nations stand against the Antichrist and the King of Kings returns to settle accounts. The question isn't whether it's coming. Scripture guarantees it. The question is whether you'll be ready, whether your family will be ready, whether the legacy you leave will stand when everything else falls. And that starts with understanding that while America may not be mentioned in prophecy, God hasn't forgotten his people. While the nation may collapse, the kingdom stands firm. While earthly armies may fail, heaven's army never loses. So let's stop grieving what's passing away and start preparing for what's coming. Because the nations are already choosing sides. The armies are positioning, and time is shorter than most people realize. Your service to your country prepared you for something bigger than you knew. Now it's time to serve the kingdom that never falls, the king who never loses, and the mission that determines where your grandchildren spend eternity. Are you ready? Because we're about to dive into the most important military intelligence briefing you've ever received. Not from Pentagon analysts, but from the Word of God. And unlike earthly intelligence that's often wrong, this briefing is 100% accurate. Because the one who gave it doesn't just predict the future, he controls it, and he's already won the war we're about to describe. Let's address this head-on. No dancing around it, no softening the blow. You want to know where America stands when the Antichrist rises to power, and you deserve a straight answer. The brutal truth is this: America is either conspicuously absent from end-times prophecy, plays a minor supporting role, or has already collapsed before the main events unfold. None of those options are comforting. All of them are possible. And current events suggest we're watching one of them happen in real time. You've spent your entire adult life watching America's power and influence shape world events. You remember when the American military might was unquestioned, when the dollar was the undisputed global reserve currency, when American culture dominated the world, when made in the USA meant quality and strength. You watched America win the Cold War, defeat Iraq in 100 hours during Desert Storm, become the sole superpower after the Soviet Union collapsed. The 1990s felt like America's moment. Democracy spreading, markets opening. History supposedly ended with American-style liberal democracy triumphant. But that was 30 years ago, and everything has changed. Today, America is $34 trillion in debt and climbing. The dollar's reserve status is being challenged by BRICS nations creating alternative currencies. China's economy rivals ours, and in some measures, surpasses it. Russia openly defies us with no real consequences. Our military can't meet recruitment goals. Our weapons stockpiles are depleted from supplying Ukraine. Our adversaries have hypersonic missiles we can't defend against. Culturally, we've gone from exporting freedom to exporting perversion, from being admired to being mocked, from leading the free world to being seen as a declining empire in its final days. And you know it. You feel it. Every time you watch the news, every time you see what's happening in Washington, every time you look at what they're teaching your grandchildren in school, you know America isn't what it was. The question is, what does biblical prophecy say about this? Let me walk you through the three main interpretations, and you can judge for yourself which one fits what you're seeing. Possibility 1. America collapses before the tribulation begins. This is the interpretation that makes the most sense when you look at the current trajectory. America doesn't appear in end times prophecy because America no longer exists as a major power by the time those events unfold. How could this happen? Multiple scenarios, all of them plausible. Economic collapse. The dollar loses reserve currency status. Hyperinflation destroys savings and retirement accounts. The banking system fails. Supply chains break down. The government can't pay its debts or fund the military. Society descends into chaos. What emerges from the ashes is either a fractured collection of regions or a weakened nation absorbed into a larger global system. You lived through 2008. You saw how close the financial system came to complete meltdown. You watched banks fail, retirement accounts evaporate, homes foreclosed. That was a tremor. The real earthquake is coming, and this time, there might not be a recovery. Civil conflict. The political division you're witnessing isn't healing. It's intensifying. Red states and blue states can barely function in the same country anymore. Different values, different worldviews, different visions of what America should be. History shows that nations this divided don't stay united. They either reconcile or split. And America shows no signs of reconciling. Some of you remember the 1960s. The riots, the protests, the social upheaval. You thought that was bad. What's coming could make that look tame. Because now the divisions aren't just political, they're geographic, cultural, and increasingly irreconcilable. Military defeat. China invades Taiwan. We're treaty-bound to defend them. But our military is stretched thin. Our weapons stockpiles depleted. Our recruitment numbers down. We enter a conflict we can't win. The result is either nuclear exchange that devastates both nations or American humiliation on a scale that destroys our global standing permanently. You remember Vietnam, the first war America lost. You remember the impact on national morale, on military confidence, on America's international reputation. Now, imagine a defeat against a peer competitor, not guerrillas in the jungle, but a modern military with technology that matches or exceeds ours. That doesn't just hurt morale, that ends superpower status. Divine judgment. This is the one most pastors won't say out loud, but it's the most biblically consistent. God judged Israel for abandoning him. He judged Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome. Why would America be exempt? You've watched America systematically remove God from public life for 60 years. School prayer was banned in 1962. Abortion legalized in 1973. Same-sex marriage imposed in 2015. Now we're celebrating transgender children and calling it progress. We've gone from one nation under God to a nation that shakes its fist at God. And the biblical pattern is clear. When a nation blessed by God turns away from Him, judgment follows, not always immediate, but inevitable. Jeremiah 12:17 establishes the principle. But if any nation does not listen, I will completely uproot and destroy it, declares the Lord. America was blessed beyond measure. More gospel preaching, more missionaries sent, more Bibles distributed than any nation in history. And we've squandered it, rejected it, turned blessing into license for rebellion. If God judged Israel, His chosen people, how much more will He judge a nation that had truth and chose lies? Possibility 2. America is absorbed into the Antichrist's global system. The second possibility is that America doesn't collapse entirely, but loses its sovereignty. We become part of a global government, a region in a worldwide empire, no longer an independent nation, but a province in the beast's system. This is actually happening right now in slow motion. Every international treaty that supersedes American law, every global institution we submit to, every time we allow the UN, WHO, WF, or any other alphabet organization to dictate policy, we surrender sovereignty. You've watched this develop. NAFTA, the Paris Climate Accord, WHO pandemic response. All of them require America to submit to international authority, to accept decisions made by non-elected global bureaucrats, to prioritize global interests over national interests. The infrastructure for world government is being built right now, and America isn't fighting it. We're facilitating it. Both political parties, with rare exceptions, support deeper international integration. Why? Because the people running America, the deep state, the permanent bureaucracy, the globalist elite, they don't believe in American nationalism anymore. They believe in global governance. They see national sovereignty as an outdated concept that prevents solving global problems, and they're conditioning the population to accept it. Every crisis, climate, pandemic, economic, whatever, is presented as requiring global solutions. Solutions that can only work if nations surrender independence and submit to centralized control. You saw this during COVID. National governments implementing the same policies at the same time. Lockdowns, mandates, vaccine passports, coordinated globally. That wasn't a coincidence. That was rehearsal. Rehearsal for what? For the system Revelation 13 describes, where the beast has authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation, where economic activity requires the mark, where resistance means exclusion from society. In this scenario, America doesn't fight the Antichrist. America joins him, becomes part of his system. Our military, our economy, our technology, all integrated into the global structure he controls. This would explain America's absence from prophecy as an independent actor. We're still there, just not as America, as part of the beast's empire. Region 1 of the 10-region global government some prophecy teachers speculate about. Possibility 3, America is mentioned, but we've missed it. The third possibility is that America is in prophecy, but disguised, symbolic, hidden in language that only becomes clear when events unfold. The most popular speculation here is Revelation 12:14. The woman was given the 2 wings of a great eagle, so that she might fly to the place prepared for her in the wilderness, where she would be taken care of for a time, times and half a time, out of the serpent's reach. 2 wings of a great eagle. America's national symbol is the eagle. Could this represent American assistance helping Israel escape to the wilderness refuge during the tribulation? It's possible. The symbolism fits. And it would mean America plays a positive role, protecting Israel, facilitating their escape, providing resources for their survival during the 3.5 years of greatest persecution. But here's the problem. That interpretation requires America to still exist as a functioning nation with military capability during the tribulation. It requires us to still support Israel when most nations turn against them. It requires strength and resources we may not have by then. And even if it's true, even if America helps Israel escape, that's still a minor role, a supporting part in someone else's story, not the dominant superpower position America has held for the last 80 years. Some also point to young lions in Ezekiel 38:13, nations that protest but don't actively fight when Russia invades Israel. Could that be America and Western allies complaining but not intervening? Again, possible, but even more depressing, reduced to verbal protests while Russia does what it wants. That's not America as a superpower. That's irrelevant to America. So, which is it? And here's what I think, based on current trajectory and biblical patterns. America is in terminal decline and will either collapse or be absorbed before or during the early tribulation. The specific mechanism, economic crash, civil conflict, military defeat, or combination, is less important than the result. America as we knew it won't exist. America as a Christian nation is already gone. America as a superpower is fading fast. And here's why this interpretation fits best. Every dominant power in biblical prophecy eventually falls when it abandons God. Egypt dominated, then fell. Babylon ruled the world, then fell. Persia was supreme, then fell. Greece conquered, then fell. Rome seemed eternal, then fell. The pattern is consistent. Nations rise, serve God's purposes, abandon God, get judged, and fall. And once they fall, they don't recover their former glory. Is there any biblical precedent for a nation as morally collapsed as America turning around and playing a major positive role in God's end times plan? No. The Bible records repentance, Nineveh under Jonah's preaching. But that was temporary. The nation still fell later. The Bible records remnants being preserved, Noah, Lot, Daniel, but the societies around them were destroyed. God saves individuals. God preserves a remnant. But God also judges nations that reject him, and that judgment is usually permanent. So what does this mean for you personally? First, stop placing your hope in political solutions. The 2024 election won't save America. No politician can. No Supreme Court can. No political movement can reverse 60 years of moral decay and divine judgment. That doesn't mean don't vote. Vote your conscience. Support what's right, but don't expect it to work. Don't think that if we just get the right people in office, America will be great again. America's problems aren't political. They're spiritual, and they're terminal. Second, transfer your allegiance fully to the kingdom of heaven. You can love America without worshiping it. You can grieve its decline without losing hope. But your identity, your citizenship, your ultimate loyalty, that belongs to Christ's kingdom, not any earthly nation. Philippians chapter 3:20 isn't a nice sentiment. It's a command. But our citizenship is in heaven, not dual citizenship, not America first, heaven second. Heaven is your country. Christ is your king. And if America has to fall for God's purposes to advance, then so be it. Third, prepare your family for America's collapse. They need to understand that the country you grew up in is gone. The prosperity, the freedom, the safety, those aren't guaranteed. In fact, they're disappearing. Your grandchildren are growing up in a nation that hates Christianity, celebrates perversion, and is racing toward judgment. They need to know that, not to create fear, but to build resilience. So they're not shocked when persecution comes. So they're not surprised when the economy collapses. So they're ready to stand firm when everyone else is compromising. Fourth, recognize that America's fall might actually be necessary for prophecy to unfold. As long as America is strong and supports Israel, certain prophetic events can't happen. Russia won't invade Israel if America would respond militarily. The Antichrist can't establish a global government if America maintains sovereignty. America's power has actually delayed some end-times events, but that delay is ending. And when America falls, the restraints come off. The pieces move into position. The prophecies accelerate. You may be witnessing not just America's decline, but the final obstacles to Christ's return being removed. Fifth, find comfort in this. Your retirement isn't in American prosperity. Your security isn't in Social Security. Your hope isn't in 401ks or real estate or any earthly treasure. Matthew chapter 6:19-20. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. You've lived long enough to see investments crash, pensions fail, secure retirements evaporate. Nothing earthly is actually secure, and in the tribulation, it all becomes worthless anyway. But what you invest in the kingdom, the prayers you pray, the truth you teach, the faith you model, the souls you influence, that endures forever. I know this is hard to hear. You love America. You served America. You wanted to believe your grandchildren would grow up in the same freedom you enjoyed, but they won't. And the sooner you accept that, the sooner you can prepare them for what they'll actually face instead of what you wish they'd face. America is falling. It may already be too late to stop it, but the kingdom you serve isn't falling. The king you follow isn't defeated. And the mission you have for your remaining years, preparing your family for tribulation, is more important than any mission you've ever had. So let go of America as your hope. Grieve if you need to, but then move forward. Because while America may not stand against the Antichrist, other nations will. And understanding which ones, why they fight, and what happens when they do. That's critical intelligence for the spiritual war you're actually in. And that war is heating up right now. In Moscow, where the Northern Coalition is forming exactly as Ezekiel predicted 2,600 years ago. Where the bear you thought was dead is rising again, more dangerous than ever. You remember the Cold War. You remember the Soviet threat. You thought it ended in 1991. But what if that was just intermission? What if the real threat is now? What if everything you learned about Russia during the Cold War was preparation for understanding what they're about to do? Because Russia isn't just mentioned in prophecy. Russia leads the most significant military coalition in the tribulation. And what they're doing right now should terrify anyone who understands Ezekiel 38. You remember where you were when the Berlin Wall fell. November 9th, 1989. The images on television, people with sledgehammers tearing down the symbol of communist oppression, East Germans flooding into West Berlin, families reunited after decades of separation, the Iron Curtain collapsing. You remember thinking, we won. The Cold War is over. Freedom defeated tyranny. Democracy conquered communism. The Soviet threat that dominated your entire adult life, gone. Reagan's strategy worked. We win, they lose. And for a brief moment in history, it looked like he was right. The USSR dissolved in 1991. Russia seemed broken, bankrupt, no longer a threat. You thought your children and grandchildren would grow up in a world where the Russian menace was just a history lesson. You were wrong. Not about the Soviet Union collapsing. That happened. But about Russia being finished. Because what you didn't understand, what none of us understood at the time, was that biblical prophecy wasn't about the Soviet Union. It was about Russia. And Russia is eternal in God's prophetic plan. Ezekiel 38 and 39 were written 2,600 years ago, centuries before communism, millennia before the USSR. But they describe with stunning precision a northern power, identifiable as Russia, leading a specific coalition in an invasion of Israel during the last days. And that prophecy didn't expire when the Berlin Wall fell. It's actually being fulfilled right now, right in front of you, in ways that should make every Cold War veteran's blood run cold. Let me show you exactly what Ezekiel saw, and then let me show you how it's happening today. Ezekiel 38:1-6 lays it out. The word of the Lord came to me. Son of man, set your face against Gog, of the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. Prophesy against him and say, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I am against you, Gog, chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. I will turn you around, put hooks in your jaws, and bring you out with your whole army, your horses, your horsemen fully armed, and a great horde with large and small shields, all of them brandishing their swords. Persia, Cush, and Put will be with them, all with shields and helmets. Also Gomer, with all its troops, and Beth Togarmah from the far north, with all its troops, the many nations with you. Let's break this down with the same intelligence analysis you'd use for any military threat assessment. Identifying the enemy. Who is Gog of Magog? For over a century, biblical scholars have identified Magog with Russia based on multiple converging evidences. Geographic evidence, Ezekiel 38:15 and 39:2. Both emphasize from the far north. From Israel's perspective, what's directly north? Syria, Turkey, and beyond them, Russia. Moscow is almost perfectly due north of Jerusalem. Linguistic evidence. The Hebrew phrase Rosh Nasi, translated as chief prince, can also be read as prince of Rosh. Rosh sounds like Russia. Meshech sounds like Moscow. Tubal sounds like Tobolsk, a major Russian city. These aren't coincidences. They're ancient tribal names for regions that became modern Russia. Historical evidence. The ancient historian Josephus identified Magog with the Scythians, who inhabited the region north of the Black Sea, modern Russia and Ukraine. You don't have to take my word for it. Prophecy scholars for over 100 years, long before the Cold War, identified this passage with Russia, not because of politics, because of geography, linguistics, and historical records. The coalition, who fights with Russia? Ezekiel lists specific allies, and every single one of them is aligning with Russia right now. Persia, modern Iran. This is explicit and undeniable. Persia didn't change names to Iran until 1935, long after Ezekiel was written. This is Iran. What's Iran's relationship with Russia today? Strategic partnership, military cooperation in Syria, defense agreements, technology sharing. Iran buys Russian weapons. Russia helps Iran's nuclear program. They coordinate against Western interests throughout the Middle East. You've watched this alliance form over the last 20 years. It wasn't inevitable. During the Cold War, Iran and the USSR had limited cooperation. But since the 1990s, and especially since US sanctions isolated both nations, they've drawn closer. Prophecy predicted it 2,600 years ago. You're watching it happen now. Cush, ancient Ethiopia, Sudan region, modern Sudan, and possibly Ethiopia. What's their relationship with Russia? Growing military ties. Russia is building a naval base in Sudan on the Red Sea. Why? Strategic positioning for Middle East operations. Sudan buys Russian weapons. Russian mercenaries operate in the region. Ethiopia has historical ties to Russia dating back to the Soviet era, now being renewed. Both nations are in Russia's sphere of influence, exactly as Ezekiel predicted. Put, ancient Libya. Libya is in chaos after NATO intervention destroyed Gaddafi's regime. And who's filling the vacuum? Russia. Wagner Group mercenaries, Russian military advisors, weapons flowing in. Russia is establishing a presence in Libya to control Mediterranean access and threaten Europe. You probably didn't pay much attention to Libya recently, but Russia has. They're positioning forces there, exactly as Ezekiel said they would. Gomer, ancient Cimmerians, likely modern Turkey or regions north of the Black Sea. Turkey is a complicated one. NATO member, historical U.S. ally. But under Erdogan, they've pivoted toward Russia. They bought Russian S-400 missile systems despite American objections. They coordinate with Russia in Syria. They're drifting away from NATO and toward a Eurasian alliance. You watched Turkey shift from reliable ally to questionable partner. Prophecy explains why. They're being pulled into the coalition Ezekiel described. Beth Togarmah, Armenia and regions near Turkey. Armenia has always been in Russia's orbit. Russian military bases, defense treaties, complete dependence on Moscow for security. Every single nation Ezekiel lists 2,600 years ago is either aligned with Russia now or moving in that direction. This isn't a coincidence. This isn't a political accident. This is a prophecy fulfilling before your eyes. The invasion plan. What does Russia want? Ezekiel 38 and 12 reveals their motivation. This is what the Sovereign Lord says. On that day, thoughts will come into your mind, and you will devise an evil scheme. You will say, I will invade a land of unwalled villages. I will attack peaceful and unsuspecting people, all of them living without walls and without gates and bars. I will plunder and loot and turn my hand against the resettled ruins and the people gathered from the nations, rich in livestock and goods, living at the center of the land. Russia invades Israel for plunder, for resources, for wealth. This seemed unlikely when Israel was poor, but modern Israel? Israel has massive natural gas deposits in the Mediterranean, technology worth billions, strategic location, resources worth taking. But there's more to it. Ezekiel 38:4 reveals something chilling. I will turn you around, put hooks in your jaws, and bring you out. God himself brings Russia down. Hooks in their jaws. Forced compulsion. Russia doesn't want to invade initially, but God manipulates circumstances to force them south. What could those circumstances be? NATO expansion threatening Russian security, economic pressure, Western sanctions, the need for resources, strategic necessity. Whatever the human reasons, God is orchestrating it, pulling Russia into position for his purposes. The timing. When does this happen? This is debated among prophecy scholars, but several clues suggest it happens early in the tribulation, possibly before it officially begins. First, Ezekiel 38:11 describes Israel as peaceful and unsuspecting. That doesn't describe Israel in the middle of the tribulation, when all hell is breaking loose. It describes Israel after making a peace covenant with the Antichrist, feeling safe, walls down, defenses relaxed. Second, the divine destruction of this coalition is so dramatic, so supernatural, so devastating, that it reshapes the entire geopolitical landscape. It likely sets the stage for the Antichrist's rise by eliminating major powers and creating chaos he can exploit. Third, the aftermath requires 7 months to bury the dead and 7 years to burn the weapons. Ezekiel 39:9-12. 7 years is the length of the tribulation. If this invasion happens mid-tribulation, the timeline doesn't work. But if it happens at the beginning, the 7 years of burning weapons could last through the entire tribulation period. The current situation. What's Russia doing now? Everything they need to do to prepare for this invasion. Military buildup. Russia has rebuilt its military since the 1990s collapse. Modern tanks, aircraft, missiles, nuclear arsenal maintained. They've proven in Ukraine they're willing to use force despite Western opposition. Some will say, but Russia's struggling in Ukraine. How can they invade Israel? Different scenarios. Ukraine had years of Western military training and unlimited NATO weapons. Israel surrounded by Russian allies who won't defend them. The terrain is different. The strategic objectives are different. And by the time this invasion happens, Russia may have learned from Ukraine's mistakes. Coalition building. Every nation Ezekiel lists is either allied with Russia or moving toward alliance. This wasn't true 30 years ago. It is now. The coalition is forming. Regional presence. Russia has military forces in Syria, right on Israel's border. They have naval access in the Mediterranean. They're building bases in Sudan and Libya. They're positioning forces for a southern move. Energy leverage. Russia controls energy supplies to Europe. They've proven willing to weaponize gas and oil. This gives them leverage to prevent European intervention if they move against Israel. Nuclear deterrent. Russia's nuclear arsenal prevents American intervention. We won't risk nuclear war to defend Israel from Russian invasion. We might protest, we might sanction, but we won't fight. Ezekiel 38:13 suggests exactly that. Nations protest but don't intervene. Everything is in place. The coalition is forming. The motivations exist. The strategic positioning is complete. All that's missing is the trigger, the divine response. How does it end? Here's where it gets supernatural. Russia invades with overwhelming force. The coalition moves south. Israel looks doomed, but God intervenes personally. Ezekiel chapter 38, describes what happens. This is what will happen on that day. When Gog attacks the land of Israel, my hot anger will be aroused, declares the sovereign Lord. In my zeal and fiery wrath, I declare that at that time there shall be a great earthquake in the land of Israel. The fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, the beasts of the field, every creature that moves along the ground, and all the people on the face of the earth will tremble at my presence. The mountains will be overturned, the cliffs will crumble, and every wall will fall to the ground. I will summon a sword against Gog on all my hills, declares the sovereign Lord. Every man's sword will be against his brother. I will execute judgment on him with plague and bloodshed. I will pour down torrents of rain, hailstones and burning sulfur on him and on his troops, and on the many nations with him. Earthquake, plague, confusion causing friendly fire, hailstones, fire and brimstone. This isn't conventional warfare. This is divine military intervention. Ezekiel 39:4-5 gives the result. On the mountains of Israel you will fall, you and all your troops and the nations with you. I will give food to all kinds of carrion birds and to the wild animals. You will fall in the open field, for I have spoken, declares the sovereign Lord. Total destruction. The Russian coalition is annihilated on the mountains of Israel, not by the Israeli military might, not by American intervention, by God Himself fighting for His people. What this means for veterans. Those of you who served during the Cold War, you spent your career preparing to fight Russia. You trained for it. You stood ready for it. Many of you were stationed in Germany, Korea, or other forward positions specifically to deter Soviet aggression. You thought that mission ended in 1991, but you were being prepared for something you didn't understand. You were learning about an enemy you'd need to recognize decades later. You were developing expertise that helps you understand current events through a prophetic lens. You know Russian military doctrine. You understand their strategic thinking. You recognize their tactics. And when you see what they're doing now, building alliances, positioning forces, creating strategic depth, you know what it means. They're preparing for war, not just Ukraine, something bigger. And Ezekiel told us 2,600 years ago exactly what that war is. The spiritual reality. This isn't ultimately about Russia. It's about God demonstrating His power to a world that's forgotten Him. Ezekiel chapter 38:23 explains the purpose. And so I will show my greatness and my holiness, and I will make myself known in the sight of many nations. Then they will know that I am the Lord. God will supernaturally destroy Russia's coalition so dramatically that the entire world has to acknowledge Him. No natural explanation will suffice. No military analysis will explain it. It'll be undeniable divine intervention. And that sets the stage for what comes next. Because after God demonstrates His power so dramatically, the world will be looking for answers, looking for leadership, looking for someone to make sense of the chaos. That's when the Antichrist steps forward, offering solutions, providing order, bringing peace. And a shaken world, having just witnessed supernatural events, will be primed to accept supernatural authority. The northern threat is real. It's forming now, and it'll be eliminated supernaturally. But its destruction creates the vacuum the Antichrist fills. Meanwhile, while Russia gathers allies in the north, another coalition is forming in the south, an ancient enemy of Israel, a religious ideology that has vowed Israel's destruction for 1,400 years. A king from the south who will attack the Antichrist with fury. You've fought these enemies before. Some of you in Desert Storm, some in Iraq, some in Afghanistan. You know Islamic warfare. You understand jihad. You've seen firsthand what religious extremism looks like. And Daniel 11 says they're not finished. The king of the south will rise. Islam will mobilize. And the final holy war they've been promising for centuries is coming. But not the way they think. Because while they fight for Allah, they're actually fulfilling prophecies written before Muhammad was born. Some of you served in Desert Storm, February 1991. You remember the mission. Liberate Kuwait from Iraqi invasion. You remember the overwhelming American military superiority. 100 hours of ground combat, and it was over. Saddam's army was destroyed. Kuwait freed. America victorious. You thought you'd defeated the Middle East threat, proven that American military power could crush any Islamic army that dared challenge us. You came home to ticker-tape parades and a nation grateful for your service. But the war didn't end. It just changed form. Others served in Iraq during the 2003 invasion and the occupation that followed. You toppled Saddam's regime in weeks. Mission accomplished banner on the aircraft carrier. But then came the insurgency. IEDs, suicide bombers, sectarian violence. Years of grinding warfare that cost thousands of American lives and trillions of dollars. Still others served in Afghanistan. 20 years fighting the Taliban, hunting Al-Qaeda, building schools and infrastructure, trying to establish democracy in a nation that didn't want it. And in August 2021, you watched it all collapse in days. The Taliban retaking Kabul, Afghans falling from aircraft. The most humiliating American military defeat since Vietnam. You gave years of your life, watched brothers die, carried wounds, physical and psychological, and for what? The Middle East is more unstable now than when you deployed. Iran is more powerful. Islamic extremism hasn't been defeated, and the enemies you fought are emboldened by American weakness. But here's what you need to understand. Every battle you fought in the Middle East was a preview, a dress rehearsal, preparation for the final Islamic war that's coming. Daniel 11:40 describes it with chilling brevity. At the time of the end, the king of the south will engage him in battle, not negotiate, not dialogue, not seek diplomatic solutions. Engage him in battle, military confrontation, active warfare. The southern power is attacking the Antichrist with everything they have. Who is this king of the south, and why do they fight? Identifying the southern king. Biblical geography places the south as territories south of Israel. Historically, this meant Egypt, and some prophecy scholars still identify modern Egypt as the primary southern power. Egypt was the dominant force south of Israel in biblical times. Pharaoh's kingdom, the power that enslaved Israel for 400 years, the nation that repeatedly invaded Israel throughout the Old Testament. In Daniel's day, when this prophecy was given, King of the South specifically meant the Ptolemaic dynasty ruling Egypt. But modern Egypt? Militarily weak, economically struggling, dependent on American aid. Not exactly the profile of a power that attacks the Antichrist's global system, which is why many scholars now interpret King of the South more broadly as an Islamic coalition. Not just Egypt, but the combined forces of radical Islam throughout North Africa and the Middle East. This makes more sense when you consider Religious motivation. Islam is the only major religion that explicitly commands military conquest. Jihad isn't just spiritual struggle, it's physical warfare to expand the caliphate. The Quran commands fighting unbelievers until all worship Allah. This creates religious obligation for military action. Historical pattern. Islam has been militarily aggressive since its founding in the 7th century. It conquered the Middle East, North Africa, Spain, and pushed into Europe before being turned back. For 1,400 years, Islamic armies have waged war against non-Islamic powers. This pattern doesn't end, it escalates. Current reality. Look at where Islamic extremism is strongest. Iran, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Libya, Sudan, Somalia, parts of Africa. A crescent of radicalism stretching across the regions south and east of Israel, all hostile to Western power, all committed to Israel's destruction, all aligned against the globalist system the Antichrist will control. Theological necessity. Islamic eschatology teaches that the Mahdi, their Messiah figure, will appear in the last days to establish global Islamic rule. He'll defeat the Dajjal, Antichrist, conquer Jerusalem, and force the world to submit to Islam. This creates expectations of final warfare. Muslims aren't waiting passively for the end times. They're preparing to fight. The Islamic endgame. You need to understand something most Americans don't grasp about Islam. It's not a religion seeking coexistence. It's a totalitarian ideology demanding submission. The word Islam literally means submission. The goal isn't religious tolerance or peaceful coexistence. It's the entire world submitting to Allah's rule as interpreted by Islamic law. And the method for achieving this isn't persuasion, it's conquest. Quran 9:29 commands, "Fight those who do not believe in Allah or in the last day, and who do not consider unlawful what Allah and His Messenger have made unlawful, and who do not adopt the religion of truth from those who were given the scripture. Fight until they give the jizya willingly while they are humbled." That's not metaphorical. That's a military command to fight non-Muslims until they submit and pay tribute. Quran 8:39 says, "And fight them until there is no fitna, and until the religion, all of it, is for Allah, all of it, the entire world, under Islamic rule." That's the stated objective. Now, most Muslims don't actively pursue this through violence. Many want peaceful lives. But the radical elements, the jihadists, the extremists, the ones who take the Quran's military commands literally, they absolutely believe in conquering the world for Islam. And in the Tribulation, when the Antichrist demands worship, when he claims divine authority, when he requires submission to his system, radical Islam will fight. Not because they recognize him as the biblical Antichrist, but because he's demanding what they believe only Allah deserves. The coming Islamic holy war. Daniel 11:40 says the king of the south will engage him in battle. This is active aggression, a first strike. The Islamic coalition attacks the Antichrist's forces. Why would they do this? First, religious compulsion. If the Antichrist demands worship, establishes his image in Jerusalem, possibly in the rebuilt temple, and claims to be God, this violates the core Islamic principle of Tawheed, Allah's absolute oneness. It's the ultimate shirk, associating partners with Allah, which Islam considers the unforgivable sin. Faithful Muslims cannot submit to this. Their theology requires resistance. If that means death, so be it. Martyrdom in jihad guarantees paradise in Islamic teaching. Second, territorial claims. Jerusalem is Islam's third holiest site. The Dome of the Rock sits on the Temple Mount. The idea of a Jewish temple being rebuilt and then desecrated by the Antichrist, intolerable to Muslims. They'll fight to prevent it or avenge it. Third, the Mahdi expectation. Islamic eschatology teaches that Jesus, Isa, will return as a Muslim prophet and assist the Mahdi in defeating the Dajjal and establishing Islamic rule. Many Islamic scholars believe these events are imminent. When the Antichrist appears, Islamic forces will mobilize thinking they're fulfilling their end times prophecies. They'll be wrong. They're not fighting for the true God. They're fighting against the Antichrist while also opposing the true Christ when he returns. But their theology compels them to fight regardless. Fourth, revenge for Western intervention. You've fought in their lands, removed their leaders, occupied their territories, killed their people. Many see this as Christian crusaders oppressing Islam. When a Western Antichrist rises, many prophecy scholars believe he'll come from revived Rome or Europe. Islamic forces will see it as continuation of Western imperialism. They'll fight not just for religion, but for revenge and resistance to foreign domination. Current Islamic positioning. Right now, the Islamic world is fragmenting into competing power centers, but all share hostility to Western global control. Iran is the obvious leader. Shia theocracy. Nuclear program advancing despite sanctions. Proxy forces throughout the region. Hezbollah in Lebanon. Militias in Iraq. Houthis in Yemen. Hamas in Gaza. They've sworn to destroy Israel. They oppose American hegemony. They're building military capability for major regional conflicts. You've watched Iran for 45 years, since the 1979 revolution. Remember the hostage crisis? Ayatollah Khomeini declaring America the Great Satan. That hatred hasn't diminished. It's intensified, and now they're months away from nuclear weapons. Turkey, under Erdogan, is pivoting from secular NATO ally to Islamic regional power. Erdogan has made statements about restoring Ottoman Empire glory. Turkey's military is NATO's second largest. They have advanced weapons, strategic location, and growing ambitions. You remember when Turkey was reliable, when they allowed American bases on their soil, when they were the model of secular Islamic democracy. That Turkey is gone. What's emerging is neo-Ottoman Turkey with Islamic identity and regional ambitions. Egypt remains significant despite weakness. Largest Arab population. Critical geographic position. Military dependent on American aid, but increasingly restless about that dependency. The Muslim Brotherhood, radical Islamic movement, tried to take control in 2011. The military stopped them, but the ideology remains popular. Libya is in chaos, with various Islamic militias controlling different regions. Some aligned with ISIS or Al-Qaeda, all hostile to Western interests. Yemen, Sudan, Somalia. Failed states where Islamic extremism thrives. Not individually powerful, but collectively contributing to regional instability and potential coalition forces. The Sunni-Shia divide complicates this. Iran leads Shia Islam. Most Arabs are Sunni. They hate each other almost as much as they hate Israel and the West. But Daniel's prophecy doesn't require unified Islamic cooperation, just southern forces attacking the Antichrist. Different Islamic groups might attack for different reasons while still fulfilling the prophecy. Military capabilities. Individually, these nations can't defeat Western militaries. You've proven that. Desert Storm, Iraq, Afghanistan. American military superiority is overwhelming in conventional warfare, but combined and facing a world already weakened by tribulation chaos, different scenarios. Consider the numbers. Iran has 575,000 active military personnel, plus millions of Basij militia. Turkey has 355,000 active military. Egypt has 440,000 active military. Pakistan, nuclear-armed Islamic nation, has 654,000 active military. That's over 2 million trained soldiers just from 4 nations, not counting militias, reserves, or other Islamic nations. Add proxy forces, terrorist organizations willing to fight, and radical volunteers seeking martyrdom. The numbers become staggering. They have modern weapons. Russia sells to Iran and Turkey. China sells to Pakistan. North Korea shares missile technology. They're not fighting with swords and camels. They have tanks, missiles, aircraft, possibly nuclear weapons, and they're willing to die. That's the factor American military planners struggle with. We fight to win and go home. They fight for paradise. Martyrdom is victory in their theology. That creates a very different kind of enemy. Strategic objectives. What does the Islamic coalition want? Daniel 11:40 says they engage him in battle. They're attacking the Antichrist. But verse 42 reveals the result. He will extend his power over many countries. Egypt will not escape. The Islamic attack fails. The Antichrist counterattacks and conquers. Egypt specifically named. Other nations implied. The Southern Coalition is defeated, but not before causing serious damage. This isn't a minor skirmish. This is major warfare that the Antichrist has to respond to militarily. It diverts his attention and resources. It creates chaos he has to manage. And while he's dealing with the southern threat, another coalition is mobilizing, one even more massive, from the east. What veterans need to understand, those of you who served in the Middle East, you know Islamic warfare. You've seen suicide bombers. You've experienced an enemy who fights without regard for their own lives. You've dealt with civilians who are combatants, and combatants who hide among civilians. You know the terrain, the tactics, the mindset. And what you learned over there prepares you to understand what's coming. The wars you fought were limited. Rules of engagement, political constraints, concern for civilian casualties, hearts and minds strategies. The Tribulation War won't have those constraints. It'll be total war, religious war, existential war, and the ferocity will exceed anything you experienced. Islamic forces will fight the Antichrist with everything they have because they believe it's their religious duty. They'll use tactics you're familiar with, suicide attacks, human shields, guerrilla warfare, but on a massive scale, coordinated across multiple nations. The spiritual reality. Here's what's tragic. Islamic forces will be right to oppose the Antichrist. He is evil. He does demand blasphemous worship. He is leading the world to destruction. But they're opposing him for the wrong reasons, with the wrong theology serving the wrong God. They think they're fighting for Allah. They're actually fulfilling biblical prophecy written 600 years before Muhammad was born. They believe they're establishing the Mahdi's kingdom. They're actually being crushed by the Antichrist before being judged by the real Christ when he returns. Romans chapter 10, verse 2-3 describes their situation perfectly. For I can testify about them that they are zealous for God, but their zeal is not based on knowledge, since they did not know the righteousness of God and sought to establish their own. They did not submit to God's righteousness. Zeal without truth, passion without knowledge, fighting the wrong battle for the wrong reasons, and they'll lose. Daniel 11:42-43 says the Antichrist conquers Egypt and Libya, controls wealth, and subdues the region. The Islamic coalition is defeated, but their defeat creates more problems for the Antichrist, because while he's conquering the south, reports from the east and north alarm him. Daniel 11:44. But reports from the east and the north will alarm him, and he will set out in a great rage to destroy and annihilate many. The north we've discussed. Russia's coalition eventually destroyed by God. The south we're discussing now. Islamic forces defeated by Antichrist. But the east? That's the most terrifying force of all. 200 million troops. An army so massive, the Apostle John specifically wrote down the number because it shocked him. China, India, Asian powers mobilizing for the final confrontation. And unlike Russia fighting for territory or Islam fighting for religion, the Eastern kings are fighting for something else entirely. Control of the world system, dominance over global governance, the ultimate geopolitical prize. You remember Vietnam, fighting an Asian enemy that seemed endless, that absorbed casualties and kept coming, that refused to surrender despite overwhelming American firepower. Now imagine that enemy with modern technology, nuclear weapons, and 200 million soldiers instead of thousands. Imagine fighting not in one small nation, but across the entire Asian continent. Imagine facing an army that could field more troops than the entire US population. That's what's gathering in the East, and they're not waiting for the tribulation to start preparing. They're building that capability right now. You remember Nixon in China, February 1972. The images on television, President Nixon shaking hands with Mao Zedong, opening diplomatic relations with Communist China after decades of hostility. You thought it was strategic brilliance, driving a wedge between China and the Soviet Union, playing the long game in the Cold War. Some of you remember earlier the Korean War, fighting Chinese forces who poured across the Yalu River in human wave attacks. Overwhelming numbers, disregard for casualties, pushes that drove American forces back through sheer mass. You learned then what fighting an Asian land army meant: endless manpower, willingness to absorb losses that would break Western nations. Then, you watched America build China into an economic powerhouse. Clinton granting most favored nation trade status. American companies are moving manufacturing to Chinese factories. Walmart shelves filled with made-in-China products. You watched your town's factory close. Jobs shipped overseas, and were told this was progress. Free trade, globalization, everyone benefits. But you had your doubts. You'd see what communists do. You'd fought them, and you watched with growing concern as China got richer, stronger, and more aggressive, while America got weaker, more divided, and more dependent on Chinese manufacturing. Now you're watching the consequences. China is threatening Taiwan, building artificial islands in the South China Sea, stealing American technology, buying influence across Africa and Latin America, partnering with Russia, challenging American military dominance in the Pacific. And you're asking the question military strategists are afraid to answer. Can America defeat China in a war? 20 years ago, the answer was obvious. Yes, easily. Today, uncertain at best. 20 years from now, if current trajectories continue, probably not. But here's what should terrify you more than Chinese military capability. Revelation prophesied this exact scenario 1900 years ago, the kings from the east. Revelation 16:12 describes one of the final judgments before Christ's return. The sixth angel poured out his bowl on the great river Euphrates, and its water was dried up to prepare the way for the kings from the east. Kings, plural. Not one eastern power, multiple nations, a coalition, coming from the east, east of Israel, that's Asia. China, most obviously, but also India, possibly Japan, Korea, Southeast Asian nations. The massive population centers of the Asian continent are mobilizing for war. Revelation 9:16 gives us a number that should make your blood run cold. The number of the mounted troops was twice 10,000 times 10,000. I heard their number. Do the math. 10,000 times 10,000 is 100 million. Twice that is 200 million soldiers. When John wrote this, the entire world population was estimated at 200 to 300 million people. An army of 200 million would have been impossible, unimaginable. Yet John wrote the number down specifically because God told him to. For 1,900 years, skeptics mocked this number as proof. Revelation couldn't be literal. No nation could field an army that large. It had to be symbolic, spiritual, not actual military forces. Then came the 20th century. China's population exploded. Today, China alone has 1.4 billion people. India has 1.4 billion. Combined, those two nations have more population than the entire world had when John wrote Revelation. And China has publicly stated they can mobilize 200 million troops if necessary. Not all active military, reserves, militia, People's Armed Police, civilian military conscripts. But 200 million people are capable of military function. What was impossible for 1,900 years is now possible, and not just possible, actively being prepared. Identifying the threat. China is the obvious leader. Population, military, economy, technology, nuclear weapons. They have everything needed to be the dominant Eastern power. You've watched China's rise your entire adult life. In 1972, when Nixon visited, China was poor, backwards, no threat to America. Their military had masses of people with primitive weapons. We could have defeated them easily. Today, they have the world's largest military, 2 million active personnel. They have modern weapons matching or exceeding American technology, hypersonic missiles we can't intercept, a navy that's now larger than ours by ship count, cyber warfare capabilities that could cripple American infrastructure. They've built this in 50 years, while you were working, raising families, and trusting that American leadership was protecting your interests. China was building the force that could destroy everything you built. Military capabilities. Let's talk specifics. This is an intelligence assessment you need to understand. Naval power. China has 340 warships compared to America's 280. They're building aircraft carriers, developing advanced submarines, controlling the South China Sea through artificial islands with military bases. They can project power throughout the Western Pacific. Remember when the U.S. Navy ruled the oceans unchallenged? Those days are ending. China is building a navy specifically designed to counter American carriers and prevent U.S. intervention in a Taiwan scenario. Missile technology. China has hypersonic missiles, weapons that travel at 5 times the speed of sound, maneuvering unpredictably. American missile defenses can't reliably stop them. This means our aircraft carriers, our bases in Japan and Guam, our entire forward deployment in the Pacific, all vulnerable. You served when American technological superiority was absolute. Now we're facing peer or near-peer competitors. That's a strategic shock most Americans don't grasp. Nuclear arsenal. China has approximately 350 nuclear warheads currently, but they're expanding rapidly. Pentagon estimates suggest 1,000 plus by 2030. They have intercontinental ballistic missiles that can hit anywhere in the continental United States. Mutual assured destruction applies to China now, not just Russia. Cyber and space. China can hack American systems. They've infiltrated government networks, defense contractors, and critical infrastructure. In a war, they could potentially disable power grids, financial systems, and communications, and they're developing anti-satellite weapons that could blind American military surveillance and GPS. Industrial capacity. Here's the most frightening part. America can't outproduce China anymore. They manufacture more ships, more missiles, more everything. In World War II, American industrial might crushed enemies. We built faster than they could destroy. Now, China has that advantage. They make our pharmaceuticals, our electronics, our steel. In a conflict, our supply chains collapse while theirs continue. That's a strategic vulnerability America has never faced before. India's role. India complicates the picture. Also 1.4 billion people, 4th largest military in the world, nuclear weapons, growing economy. But India and China are rivals, not allies. Border disputes, competition for regional dominance, historical conflicts. So how do they both end up as kings from the East in Revelation? Several possibilities. Scenario 1. They're not allies, just both mobilizing toward the same battlefield for different reasons. China wants to challenge Western and Antichrist control. India wants to prevent Chinese dominance. Both armies end up in the Middle East, converging at Armageddon despite mutual hostility. Scenario 2. A common enemy unites them temporarily. If the Antichrist threatens both, they might coordinate against him despite disliking each other. Enemy of my enemy logic. Scenario 3. By the Tribulation, their rivalry has resolved somehow, or one has dominated the other, and India is subordinate to Chinese leadership. Regardless of their relationship, Both nations contribute to the Eastern Coalition. India's military is 1.4 million active personnel. Combined with China, that's over 3 million professional soldiers before adding reserves and militia. Current events. Watch what China is doing right now. This isn't speculation. This is observable reality. Taiwan crisis. China has stated reunification with Taiwan is inevitable. They conduct military exercises simulating invasion. They fly warplanes into Taiwan's air defense zone regularly. U.S. intelligence suggests they could attempt invasion by 2027. If China invades Taiwan and succeeds, American credibility in the Pacific collapses. Japan, South Korea, Philippines, all our allies realize American protection is worthless. China becomes the dominant regional power. The balance shifts permanently. Belt and Road Initiative. China is building infrastructure across Asia, Africa, and Europe. Roads, ports, railroads. Officially, it's economic development. Strategically, it's building the supply lines for military operations. The road from China to the Middle East is being paved right now. Alliance with Russia. Despite historical rivalry, China and Russia are cooperating. Joint military exercises. Economic partnership. Coordinated opposition to American hegemony. If Russia moves south, Ezekiel chapter 38, and China moves west, Revelation 16, they could coordinate to prevent American intervention. Economic warfare. China is working with Russia and BRICS nations to create alternative currency systems, reducing dollar dominance, building financial infrastructure independent of Western control. When they're economically independent, military independence follows. Historical precedent. You've fought Asian land wars. You know how it goes. Korea. Chinese human wave attacks. Overwhelming numbers. Disregard for casualties. American forces were technologically superior, but unable to achieve victory because the enemy kept coming. Ended in stalemate. Vietnam. Different enemy but similar pattern. Asian forces willing to absorb casualties that would break Western armies. Patient, willing to fight for decades, eventually wearing down American will despite losing every major battle. Those were small wars compared to what's coming. Korea and Vietnam combined killed about 100,000 Americans. The Eastern Army Revelation describes is 2,000 times larger than the forces you faced in Vietnam. And they'll have modern weapons, not AK-47s and RPGs, advanced missiles, drones, electronic warfare, cyber attacks. All the technology America developed, they've stolen or copied. Your technological advantage is disappearing. The motivation. Why do the Eastern kings mobilize? Revelation 16:14 gives the answer. They are demonic spirits that perform signs, and they go out to the kings of the whole world to gather them for the battle on the great day of God Almighty. Demonic influence, supernatural compulsion. They're being gathered for purposes they don't fully understand. They think they're pursuing national interests, securing resources, challenging Western hegemony, preventing the Antichrist's control. But actually, they're being moved into position for God's final judgment. Like chess pieces moved by a player, they think they're acting independently while actually fulfilling divine purpose. China doesn't believe in biblical prophecy. They're atheist communists. But they'll fulfill prophecy anyway because God controls history, even when nations don't acknowledge him. The geography. Revelation 13:12 mentions the Euphrates River drying up to prepare the way. The Euphrates runs through Iraq and Syria, the natural barrier between Asia and the Middle East. Historically, crossing the Euphrates meant invading Mesopotamia. For an Asian army to reach Israel, they'd have to cross this river, and Revelation says it dries up, removing the barrier. Is this literal? Some prophecy scholars point to Turkey's dams on the Euphrates. Turkey could divert water, effectively drying up the river downstream in Iraq. Others suggest it's symbolic, the political barrier between East and West being removed, allowing easy passage. Either way, the path from China to Israel is being prepared. Belt and Road Initiative builds the roads. Regional instability removes political barriers. And when the time comes, 200 million troops will move west. The ultimate confrontation. Here's what you need to understand about the scale. Revelation 16:16 says they gather at Armageddon, the valley of Megiddo in northern Israel. This valley is about 14 miles wide and 20 miles long, roughly 280 square miles. You can't fit 200 million soldiers in 280 square miles. They'd be packed shoulder to shoulder with no room to maneuver, which means the gathering at Armageddon likely refers to regional concentration. Armies spreading across northern Israel, southern Lebanon, Syria, possibly Jordan. The entire Levant becomes the battlefield. This isn't a single battle. It's a war zone the size of multiple countries. All the armies of the world, Eastern forces, remnants of Russia's coalition, Islamic forces, European armies under Antichrist control, all converging on Israel. Why? Because that's where God has chosen to end human rebellion. The place where his son was crucified is the place where his son returns in judgment. Geographic poetry, divine justice. What veterans understand? Those of you with military experience understand something civilians don't. Logistics wins wars. The Eastern Army moving from China to the Middle East, that's a logistical nightmare. Thousands of miles, feeding 200 million soldiers, fueling vehicles, supplying ammunition, medical support, communications. The complexity is staggering. Modern militaries struggle to sustain operations a few hundred miles from home. China attempting to project power to the Middle East without local supply bases, without control of intervening territory, without air superiority over the route. Normally impossible, but Revelation says it happens, which means either A. The tribulation chaos has eliminated normal barriers. Governments collapse. Borders meaningless. Infrastructure doesn't need protecting because there's nothing left to protect. i.e., technology advances to make it possible. Rail lines across Asia, automated supply systems, drone logistics, capabilities we can't imagine yet. C. Supernatural influence overrides natural limitations. Demonic spirits gathering them aren't limited by human logistics. Probably a combination of all three. But the result is clear. An army that shouldn't be possible assembles anyway. Your role. You can't stop China's military buildup. You can't prevent the Eastern kings from mobilizing. You're one person, aging, limited influence. But you can prepare your family for what Chinese dominance means. Economic preparation. Chinese digital currency could become a global standard. The social credit system could go worldwide. The surveillance state they've perfected could be the model for the mark of the beast. Your grandchildren need to understand that resisting this system is possible. Millions of Chinese Christians already do it. Spiritual preparation. The Chinese underground church has survived 75 years of persecution. They know how to practice faith under totalitarian control. Their experience is the model for what's coming globally. Study how they function. Learn from their strategies. Prophetic understanding. When China makes aggressive moves, invading Taiwan, threatening neighbors, challenging American power, don't panic. It's prophesied, predicted, part of the plan. God is in control even when China seems unstoppable. Prayer focus. Chinese Christians face persecution. American believers can't imagine. Pray for them. Support them. There are brothers and sisters on the front lines of the spiritual war that will soon go global. The Eastern Army is real, growing, preparing. And when the time comes, they'll march west, fulfilling prophecies written before they existed. But they're not the final word. Because while armies gather from north, south, and east, there's one power they all forgot about. One nation at the center that God Himself will defend. One people who will see their Messiah return and recognize Him at last. Israel, betrayed by the Antichrist, surrounded by enemies, facing annihilation. but protected by a God who never abandons his covenant people. And what happens when Israel's enemies think they've won? That's when heaven invades earth. If you're 77 years old or older, you were alive on May 14th, 1948. You might not remember it. You were just a child, but you existed when the impossible happened. A nation dead for 2 millennia came back to life in a single day. If you're younger than that, you've still witnessed Israel's story unfold in ways that confirm every word of biblical prophecy. The Six-Day War in 1967. Jerusalem reunited under Jewish control for the first time since 70 AD. You saw it happen. You watched impossibility become reality. You've watched tiny Israel, smaller than New Jersey, survive despite being surrounded by hostile nations with 100 times their population. You've seen them win wars they shouldn't have won, develop technology that makes them a global leader despite having no natural resources, build an economy that rivals European nations despite constant warfare and terrorism. And if you've been paying attention to biblical prophecy, you know why. God isn't finished with Israel. He has one final plan for them, and it's unfolding right now. But that plan includes the most devastating betrayal in human history, a covenant with the Antichrist that seems like salvation but leads to destruction, a peace treaty that brings 3.5 years of relief, followed by 3.5 years of horror, and a remnant that will see their Messiah and finally recognize him. Let me walk you through what's coming for Israel, why it matters, and what it means for you as a believer watching from America. The Covenant. Daniel 9:27 describes the trigger event that starts the tribulation clock ticking. He will confirm a covenant with many for 1 7. In the middle of the 7, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering. He, the Antichrist, a charismatic global leader who appears to solve unsolvable problems, who brings order out of chaos, who promises peace and security to a world desperate for both. And he makes a 7-year covenant with Israel. Not just Israel, with many. This is a multinational agreement, but Israel is central. The covenant specifically allows sacrifice and offering, which means the Jewish temple is rebuilt. Animal sacrifices resume. Religious practices return. This is what Israel has wanted for 2,000 years. Access to the Temple Mount, permission to rebuild, protection to practice. And the Antichrist gives it to them. You've followed the news about Temple Mount tensions. Muslims control it through the Waqf. The Dome of the Rock sits where the temple stood. Any attempt by Jews to pray there causes riots. The idea of rebuilding the temple seems impossible, one of the most contested pieces of real estate on earth. But the Antichrist will solve it. Through military might, diplomatic genius, supernatural deception, or combination, he'll accomplish what no one else could. He'll broker the deal that lets Israel rebuild, and Israel will trust him. They'll believe he's their savior, not their Messiah. Most Israelis are secular and don't think in those terms, but their protector, their guarantor of security, the strong man who finally makes peace possible. The current setup. Watch what's happening in Israel right now. This isn't distant prophecy. This is current events setting the stage. Abraham Accords. In 2020, Israel normalized relations with UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, Sudan. These were historic agreements. Arab nations recognizing Israel, trade deals, cooperation, the framework for regional peace. You remember when every Arab nation refused to acknowledge Israel's existence, when maps in Arab countries didn't show Israel at all. Now they're making deals, opening embassies, doing business. This isn't the final covenant Daniel describes, but it's the foundation. It's proving that peace deals are possible, that Arab nations will negotiate. Regional cooperation can happen. Saudi normalization talks. Saudi Arabia, the most influential Arab nation, has been in discussions with Israel about normalizing relations. That seemed impossible 5 years ago. Now it's being negotiated. What would make Saudi Arabia finally agree? What would be the grand bargain that brings the most important Arab nation into peace with Israel? Possibly solving the Palestinian issue, dividing Jerusalem, access to the Temple Mount, the exact issues the Antichrist's covenant will address. Temple preparation. The Temple Institute in Jerusalem has spent decades preparing for the Third Temple. Priestly garments, temple vessels, training Levites for service, breeding red heifers for sacrifice. Everything needed for temple worship is ready. You can visit their website. See the preparations. This isn't theoretical anymore. They're ready. They're waiting. All they need is permission and protection to build. Political instability. Israel's current political situation is fractured. Coalition governments, judicial reform battles, deep divisions between religious and secular, left and right. They are vulnerable, searching for leadership, desperate for someone who can unite them and guarantee security. That's the environment where the Antichrist appears. Not as an obvious enemy, as a solution. A leader who can do what their politicians can't, who can deliver what they desperately need. The betrayal. For 3.5 years, the covenant holds. Israel has peace. The temple was rebuilt. Sacrifices are offered. Tourism booms. The economy thrives. They think they've finally arrived at the security and prosperity they've sought since 1948. Then comes the abomination of desolation. Matthew 24:15-16 records Jesus' warning. So when you see standing in the holy place the abomination that causes desolation, spoken of through the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. The Antichrist enters the rebuilt temple. He stops the sacrifices. He sets himself up as God. He demands worship. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2:3-4 describes it. Don't let anyone deceive you in any way, for that day will not come until the rebellion occurs and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the man doomed to destruction. He will oppose and will exalt himself over everything that is called God or is worshipped, so that he sets himself up in God's temple, proclaiming himself to be God. In God's temple, the one the Antichrist allowed them to rebuild, the one they trusted him to protect. Now he's defiling it, claiming divine authority, demanding worship. This is when Israel realizes their mistake. The man they trusted is the enemy. The peace was a trap. The covenant was deception. And they're surrounded by his armies with nowhere to run. The persecution. What follows is the worst period in Jewish history. And that's saying something for a people who survived Egyptian slavery, Babylonian captivity, Roman occupation, the Spanish Inquisition, Russian pogroms, and the Holocaust. Zechariah 13:8-9 gives the horrifying numbers. In the whole land, declares the Lord, 2/3 will be struck down and perish, yet 1/3 will be left in it. This third I will put into the fire, sir. I will refine them like silver and test them like gold. 2/3 of Israel dies. If the current population is about 7 million Jews in Israel, that's nearly 5 million dead. Worse than the Holocaust in absolute numbers. The greatest genocide in Jewish history. The Antichrist hunts them systematically. Revelation 12:13 describes it. When the dragon saw that he had been hurled to the earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. The woman is Israel. The dragon is Satan working through the Antichrist. And he pursues them with murderous fury, because he knows if he can destroy Israel, he can prevent Christ's return. If there's no Israel for Christ to save, no nation to recognize him, no fulfillment of prophecies about Israel's restoration, maybe he can change the ending. It won't work, but he'll try, and millions will die in the attempt, the escape. But God doesn't abandon his people. Revelation 12:6 reveals the divine plan. The woman fled into the wilderness to a place prepared for her by God, where she might be taken care of for 1,260 days. 1,260 days. Exactly 3.5 years. The second half of the tribulation, God prepares a place, a refuge where the Antichrist can't reach them. where the remnant survives. Where is this place? The Bible doesn't specify exactly, but clues point to possibilities. Petra, Jordan, the ancient city carved into red rock cliffs in southern Jordan, defensible. Remote, located in Edom, which Daniel 11:41 says escapes Antichrist control, large enough to shelter hundreds of thousands. Accessible from Israel, but protected by terrain. Many prophecy scholars believe this is where Israel's remnant flees. Some even suggest the two wings of a great eagle in Revelation 12:14 represents aircraft, possibly American or Israeli, transporting refugees to Petra when ground routes are cut off. The Judean wilderness, the area east of Jerusalem toward the Dead Sea. Mountains, caves, wadis. David hid from Saul there. The Maccabees hid from the Greeks there. Underground monasteries and fortifications still exist. The terrain makes occupation difficult. Multiple locations. God might not put all his eggs in one basket. Scattered communities throughout regions the Antichrist can't fully control. Mountains, deserts, remote areas where his people can survive on the margins. The specific location matters less than the principle. God preserves a remnant, always. Noah survived the flood. Lot escaped Sodom. Daniel survived Babylon. God never leaves himself without witnesses. And in the tribulation, 1/3 of Israel survives, refined like silver, tested like gold, purified through suffering, brought to the end of themselves, ready to recognize their Messiah when he appears. The IDF's role. Israel doesn't just flee passively. The Israel Defense Forces, one of the most capable militaries in the world, will fight. You've watched Israel's military excellence for decades. The raid on Entebbe, the destruction of Iraq's nuclear reactor, the precision strikes on terrorist leaders. The Iron Dome intercepts thousands of rockets. They're professional, trained, technologically advanced. When the Antichrist betrays them, when his armies surround them, they won't surrender quietly. They'll fight, house to house in Jerusalem, tank battles in the valleys, airstrikes against superior numbers. They'll inflict massive casualties even while being overwhelmed. Zechariah 12:2-3 predicts this. I am going to make Jerusalem a cup that sends all the surrounding peoples reeling. Judah will be besieged as well as Jerusalem. On that day, when all the nations of the earth are gathered against her, I will make Jerusalem an immovable rock for all the nations. All who try to move it will injure themselves. Jerusalem becomes a trap for its attackers. They think they're conquering it, but they're injuring themselves trying. The IDF makes them pay for every street, every building, every meter of ground. But there's a limit. Eventually, the sheer numbers overwhelm them. Zechariah 14:2 describes the result. I will gather all the nations to Jerusalem to fight against it. The city will be captured, the houses ransacked, and the women raped. Half of the city will go into exile. Half the city was captured. Israeli forces pushed back. Defeat imminent. It looks like the end, like the Antichrist has won, like Israel is about to be destroyed completely. That's when heaven intervenes. The recognition. Zechariah 12:10 describes the moment that changes everything. And I will pour out on the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and supplication. They will look on me, the one they have pierced, and they will mourn for him as one mourns for an only child, and grieve bitterly for him as one grieves for a firstborn son. They will look on me, the one they pierced. Jesus, the Messiah their ancestors rejected, the one crucified in Jerusalem 2,000 years ago, the one Christians have been saying was their Messiah all along, and they'll see him, not in vision, not in theology, but with their physical eyes as he returns to save them, and they'll recognize him, know him, understand what they did, what they rejected, who he really was. The mourning will be profound, national, devastating. Zechariah 12:11-14 describes family by family mourning apart, not celebration, not relief. Grief, over rejecting their own Messiah for 2 millennia. But with the grief comes salvation. Romans 11:26 promises, "And in this way all Israel will be saved. As it is written, the deliverer will come from Zion. He will turn godlessness away from Jacob." All Israel, not every individual Jew. 2/3 are dead. But Israel as a nation, the believing remnant, those who survived the tribulation and recognized their Messiah when he appeared. The nation that rejected Christ for 2,000 years finally accepts him in a day, in a moment, when they see him coming to save them from annihilation. What this means for you. You've probably supported Israel your whole Christian life. You believe Genesis 12:3. "I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse." You've defended Israel politically, supported them financially, prayed for the peace of Jerusalem. But have you understood their prophetic destiny? It's not just surviving as a nation, it's recognizing Jesus as Messiah. The temple isn't rebuilt so Jews can continue rejecting Christ. It's rebuilt so the Antichrist can defile it, triggering the events that lead to Israel's salvation. Your support for Israel shouldn't be blind nationalism. It should be rooted in understanding God's plan for them, a plan that includes suffering, refining, and ultimately recognition of their Messiah. Pray for that recognition. Pray that individual Jews come to Christ now, before the tribulation. Pray that the remnant survives. Pray that when Jesus appears, every Jewish eye sees him and knows him. Teach your grandchildren about Israel's role. They'll live through the covenant, the betrayal, the persecution. They need to understand that Israel's suffering isn't random. It's prophetic, part of God's plan to bring them to recognition. Support Messianic Jews, Jews who already recognize Jesus as Messiah. They're persecuted by both secular Jews and traditional Christians who don't trust them. But they're the first fruits, the preview of what all Israel will become when Christ returns. Don't be deceived by false peace. When the covenant is signed, many Christians will celebrate. Peace in the Middle East, prophecy fulfilled, but that peace is a trap. It leads to betrayal. Warn people, the covenant isn't the answer. It's the trigger for the worst period in history. Israel's story isn't finished. You've watched the first chapters, rebirth, survival, prosperity, but the final chapters are coming. Covenant, betrayal, persecution, escape, divine rescue, recognition, salvation. And when Israel recognizes their Messiah, when they mourn for the one they pierced, when they cry out for him to save them, that's when the real battle begins. Not Israel fighting alone, not the IDF with limited ammunition and overwhelming enemies, but heaven's armies, led by the King of Kings, returning to the very place he was crucified, coming back not as a suffering servant, but as a conquering warrior. And every enemy that surrounded Jerusalem, every army that sought Israel's destruction, every power that thought they'd finally eliminated God's chosen people, they're about to meet the one they should have feared all along. The Lion of Judah is coming, and he's not coming to negotiate. Russia from the north, Islamic forces from the south, China's massive army from the east, Israel at the center, fighting for survival. These are the obvious players in end times prophecy, the ones prophecy teachers focus on, the powers everyone expects. But what about the nations nobody's talking about? What about Europe? The continent prophecy says produces the Antichrist, but doesn't explain clearly whether every European nation submits. What about Latin America, Africa, smaller nations that don't make headlines but still have populations, militaries, and the capacity to resist? And most importantly, for you, what about the resistance movements, the guerrilla fighters, the underground cells, the veterans who won't bow, the citizens who refuse compliance even when their governments surrender? Because here's what most prophecy teachers miss. Revelation 13:7 says the beast was given power to make war against the saints. Not just oppress them, not just persecute them. Make war. War implies resistance, fighting, opposition that requires military force to crush, which means there are people fighting back. Not just martyrs dying passively, but active resistors, believers and non-believers who refuse to submit and are willing to fight. Some of them might be in nations you'd never expect, and some of them might be you. Eastern Europe, the nations that remember. You remember the Cold War, the Iron Curtain. Eastern Europe was trapped under Soviet domination for 45 years. Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Romania, East Germany, occupied, oppressed, denied freedom. You remember solidarity in Poland, Lech Walesa, and the shipyard workers who defied the communists. You remember the Prague Spring crushed by Soviet tanks. You remember the Romanian Revolution where Ceausescu was executed. You watched Eastern Europe throw off communist tyranny in 1989. Those nations know what oppression looks like. They lived it. The older generation, your peers, they remember. They haven't forgotten. And they're watching the European Union with growing alarm as it becomes exactly what they escaped. A centralized, unelected bureaucracy demanding compliance and punishing dissent. Poland stands out. 38 million people, strong military, deep Catholic identity, and a fierce commitment to sovereignty that comes from centuries of occupation by Russians, Germans, Austrians, Soviets. Poland resists EU pressure on immigration, LGBTQ+ ideology, judicial independence. Brussels threatens sanctions. Poland refuses to comply. They've been threatened by greater powers before. They didn't break then. They won't break now. When the Antichrist rises, likely from a revived Roman Empire centered in Europe, Poland won't automatically submit. Their history, their faith, their cultural memory of communist oppression all point toward resistance. They have NATO training and equipment, modern F-35 fighters, Patriot missile systems, one of the largest armies in Europe. If they choose to fight rather than submit, they have the capability to do serious damage. Hungary shows similar patterns. Viktor Orban has built a government that openly defies EU globalism. He talks about Christian civilization, opposes mass immigration, refuses LGBTQ+ indoctrination in schools. The EU hates him. He doesn't care. Hungary is small, 10 million people, but culturally influential in Eastern Europe and symbolically important. If Hungary resists the Antichrist's European system, it provides a model for others. The Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, small but strategically positioned. They've lived under Russian occupation. They know tyranny. They've rebuilt as free nations and have no interest in surrendering to European or Russian control. Together, these Eastern European nations represent a block of resistance potential. Maybe 100 million people total across Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Romania, Bulgaria, Baltic states, not individually powerful, but collectively significant. And they have something Western Europe has lost. They remember what it costs to be free, and they're willing to pay that cost again. Western Europe, the unexpected remnant. Western Europe seems like the Antichrist's home base. Secular, post-Christian, embracing every form of moral decay. You look at London, Paris, Berlin, and see societies that have completely rejected God. But even in deep apostasy, God preserves a remnant. France has seen massive protests against government overreach, the Yellow Vest movement, resistance to pension reform, farmers blocking roads, a population that still knows how to fight for their interests even if they don't fight for God. When the Antichrist system becomes oppressive enough, French resistance, historically proven from the Huguenots to World War II, could emerge again. Not necessarily Christian resistance, but resistance nonetheless. Italy has strong regional identities. Northern Italy versus Southern Italy. Sardinia and Sicily with separatist sentiments. When centralized European control becomes too oppressive, Italian regions might fragment and resist. Spain has Basque and Catalan separatist movements. Long history of regional resistance to central authority. The Antichrist trying to control Spain might face insurgency from regions that have fought for independence for centuries. None of these are biblically motivated resistance. They're political, cultural, regional, but they still create chaos for the Antichrist's attempts at total control. They tie up military resources, create ungovernable territories, provide pockets where believers might survive. The Americas, North and South. We've discussed America's uncertain fate, likely collapsed or absorbed. But what about Canada? What about Mexico? What about Central and South America? Brazil has 215 million people, massive landmass, growing evangelical population, natural resources for independence. They've resisted U.S. pressure historically. They've built their own regional influence through BRICS partnership. When the global government demands submission, Brazil might resist. Not because they're righteous, but because they've always insisted on charting their own course. And Brazilian evangelicals, tens of millions of them, they know the gospel. When the mark is required, they'll recognize the test. Mexico is culturally Catholic, but increasingly evangelical. 130 million people, right on America's border. If America collapses, Mexico doesn't automatically submit to European Antichrist. They might pursue their own path. Argentina, Chile, Colombia, all have significant Christian populations. All have histories of resisting foreign control. All have terrain that makes occupation difficult. Mountains, jungles, geographic isolation. The Antichrist might control North America and Europe, but securing South America? That requires resources and attention he might not have while fighting Russia, China, and Islamic forces. Africa, the forgotten continent. Africa has 1.3 billion people, 54 nations, massive resources, growing Christian population, and governments too weak to enforce Antichrist's system even if they wanted to. Nigeria has 230 million people, split between Muslim North and Christian South, already fighting Boko Haram and Islamic extremism. When the tribulation comes, Nigerian Christians won't suddenly submit. They've been dying for their faith for years. They'll continue resisting. Kenya, Uganda, to Ethiopia, all have strong Christian populations. All have experience with persecution. All have rural areas where government control is limited. The Congo is massive and mostly ungoverned. Militias control territory. Central authority is weak. The Antichrist trying to implement the mark in the Congolese jungle? Nearly impossible. Sub-Saharan Africa might be where the largest number of believers survive the tribulation. Not because African governments resist, but because African governments can't enforce compliance. The infrastructure doesn't exist. The surveillance systems aren't built. The control mechanisms don't reach rural areas. In the developed world, the mark system will be comprehensive, digital, inescapable. But in Africa, millions of people live outside any system. They'll continue living that way, refusing the mark because they're not even connected to the economy it controls. The underground resistance. Even in nations that officially submit to the Antichrist, resistance will exist, underground, hidden, operating in the shadows. House churches. In China has survived 75 years of communist persecution. Tens of millions of believers meeting in secret, supporting each other outside official systems. When the Antichrist system goes global, Chinese Christians already know how to function outside it. Underground networks in the Middle East. Believers in Iran, Saudi Arabia, other Islamic nations who already practice their faith in secret at risk of death. They're prepared for tribulation conditions because they're already living in them. Rural communities are in multiple nations. Places where government presence is minimal, where people know their neighbors, where trust networks exist outside official systems. When the mark becomes mandatory in cities, rural populations might simply ignore it and continue as they have for generations. Veteran networks in the United States and allied nations. Men who took an oath to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Some of you are in this category. You're older now. You can't fight like you did at 25, but you know how to organize, how to plan, how to resist. When the government demands you take the mark, worship the beast, surrender your weapons, betray your faith, what will you do? Some will comply. Others will resist. And resistance by trained military veterans, even elderly ones, is different from resistance by untrained civilians. You know tactics. You understand operational security. You can train others, and your generation has something younger people don't. You're not afraid to die. You've already lived full lives. You have less to lose. The theology of resistance. This is where it gets complicated. Should Christians resist physically or submit to persecution and accept martyrdom? The Bible gives examples of both. Passive resistance. Daniel and his friends. They refused to worship the image but didn't fight. They accepted the fiery furnace and the lion's den. God delivered them supernaturally, but they were willing to die. Active resistance. Nehemiah rebuilt Jerusalem's walls with workers holding weapons. He fought enemies who tried to stop God's work. He didn't just pray. He organized military defense. Different callings. Peter and Paul submitted to execution. But David fought Goliath and many battles. Both were faithful. Different circumstances. Different calls. The New Testament emphasizes spiritual warfare over physical. Our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world. Ephesians 6, chapter 12. But that doesn't mean physical defense is always wrong. Romans 13 says governing authorities bear the sword. Private citizens can defend their families. The question is, when physical resistance is appropriate versus when martyrdom is the call. My take. Different believers will have different calls. Some will be martyrs. Their blood will witness God's truth. Others will be resistors, fighting to protect those who can't protect themselves. Both are biblical. Both are faithful when done in obedience to God's specific call on your life. But what's not biblical is taking the mark to save your physical life. That's the one line you cannot cross. Whether you resist physically or submit to martyrdom, the mark is spiritual suicide, temporary survival, eternal damnation. What veterans need to know. Those of you who served, you took an oath to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That oath had no expiration date. You might be retired from active service, but you're not released from the principles you swore to uphold. When the Antichrist system demands you violate your conscience, your faith, your loyalty to Christ, you face a choice. And your military training actually prepared you for this choice better than civilian life does. You know what it means to follow orders you disagree with. You know the chain of command. And you know that illegal orders must be refused. The Nuremberg defense, "I was just following orders," wasn't accepted then, and won't be accepted at the Great White Throne Judgment. If your government orders you to take the mark, that's an illegal order from heaven's perspective. You must refuse. The consequences might be severe, but you've faced consequences before. You signed up knowing you might die. This is the same principle. Spiritual warfare instead of physical. But the stakes are actually higher. Your role might not be physical resistance. At 65, 70, 75 years old, you're not running through jungles fighting guerrilla warfare. But you can. Mentor younger men who might need to make those decisions. Teach them operational security, how to organize, how to maintain discipline under pressure. Your experience is invaluable, even if your body can't do what it once did. Provide wisdom to resistance movements. You've seen combat. You know what works and what doesn't. You can counsel against stupid mistakes that get people killed unnecessarily. Pray with strategic understanding. You know how to read situations militarily. You can pray specifically, intelligently, for resistance movements and persecuted believers. Your prayers carry weight because you understand what you're praying for. Die well, if necessary. You've faced death before, in combat, in close calls, in moments where you thought you wouldn't make it. You're not as afraid as people who've lived comfortable lives. If martyrdom is your call, you'll face it with the same courage you faced enemy fire. The timeline question. When does all this resistance happen? Is it scattered throughout the tribulation? Concentrated at the end? The Bible doesn't give us a detailed timeline, but we can infer early tribulation. The Antichrist consolidates power. Some nations resist, but most are brought into line through economic pressure, military force, or deception. The mark isn't implemented immediately. There's a build-up period. Mid-tribulation, the abomination of desolation. The mask comes off. The Antichrist reveals his true nature. This is when serious resistance begins. Both nations, Russia's invasion, Islamic forces, Eastern kings mobilizing, and individuals refusing the mark, underground churches activating. Late tribulation, full warfare, armies converging on Israel, resistance movements crushed in most places, but surviving in pockets. Martyrdom is massive, but also divine protection for the remnant. The wheat separated from the chaff, the sheep from the goats. You might see the beginning of this. If you're 65 now, you could live another 15 to 20 years. The Antichrist could rise in that time frame. You might face the marked decision yourself. You might have to choose between physical survival and spiritual faithfulness. Are you ready? Not theoretically, actually ready. Have you settled in your heart that you'll refuse the mark, even if it means starving, even if it means watching your grandchildren suffer, even if it means execution, because that's coming, for your generation or the next. And the nations that resist, the unexpected fighters in Europe, the Americas, Africa, they'll buy some time, create some space, protect some believers. But ultimately, every person faces the choice individually. And your nation's decision doesn't determine yours. Even if America submits entirely, you can refuse. Even if every government on earth bows to the beast, you can stand. Resistance isn't just national, it's personal. And the most important resistance isn't military. It's spiritual, refusing the mark, maintaining faith, standing firm when everyone else is falling. The unexpected fighters will surprise the world. Nations nobody thought would resist will defy the Antichrist. Regions considered lost will produce remnants, and individuals written off as too old, too weak, too irrelevant will model courage that inspires the generation behind them. But all the human resistance, every army, every militia, every underground church, it's just buying time, creating space, preserving the remnant until the real warrior arrives. Because when heaven's armies mobilize, when the King of Kings returns, when the ultimate fighter enters the battlefield, every human army becomes irrelevant. And that's where we're heading next. The final battle. The moment when all resistance converges. When every army that ever opposed God faces the one they should have feared from the beginning. Armageddon is coming, and you need to understand what that really means. You've served in combat. You've seen firepower. You know what modern weapons can do. Artillery, airstrikes, smart bombs, cruise missiles. Maybe some of you witnessed nuclear tests or trained for nuclear warfare scenarios. You understand destructive capability better than civilians ever will. But you've never seen anything like what's coming. Because the final battle, the ultimate confrontation that ends human rebellion, isn't won by superior technology. It's not decided by troop numbers or tactical brilliance. It's not even a fair fight. When God enters the battlefield personally, when heaven's armies descend, when Christ returns as warrior king, every human weapon becomes a child's toy. Every military strategy becomes irrelevant. Every army that thought it was powerful discovers what power actually means. You've read the accounts, maybe you've studied them in Sunday school or Bible study. But let me walk you through them as a veteran speaking to veterans. Because these aren't fairy tales. They're military history written in advance. Divine operations that make D-Day look like a training exercise. Old Testament precedents. God has done this before, intervened militarily, fought for his people when human armies couldn't win, and every time it demonstrated the same principle. When God fights, the battle is already over. 2 Kings 6:15-17. Elisha and his servant are surrounded by an Aramean army. Horses, chariots, overwhelming force. The servant panics. What shall we do? Elisha prays. God opens the servant's eyes, and suddenly he sees what's really there. The hills were full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. Those of you who served, imagine being surrounded by enemy forces, outnumbered, outgunned. It looks hopeless. Then reinforcements arrive. Not a platoon, not a battalion, an entire division of the most advanced military force in existence, invisible to the enemy, waiting for the command to engage. That's what Elisha saw. That's what's coming at Armageddon. The enemy sees human armies, but surrounding them, invisible until God reveals them, are the hosts of heaven. And when they're revealed, the battle ends instantly. Kings 19:35. The Assyrian army surrounds Jerusalem, 185,000 trained soldiers, the most powerful military force in the ancient world. King Hezekiah prays. Isaiah the prophet delivers God's message. The Assyrians won't conquer Jerusalem. That night, one angel, a single angelic warrior, goes through the Assyrian camp. By morning, 185,000 soldiers are dead. No battle, no resistance, just divine execution. One angel, 185 are dead. If one angel has that capability, what happens when thousands of angels engage? What happens when heaven's entire military force deploys? Joshua 10:11 through 10:11. Israel is fighting the Amorite coalition. Joshua and his army are winning, but they need more time to complete the victory. So Joshua prays, and God responds with divine artillery. The Lord hurled large hailstones down on them from the sky, and more of them died from the hail than were killed by the swords of the Israelites. God's weapons kill more enemies than Israel's weapons. The same will happen at Armageddon. Human armies will fight, but divine intervention will be what actually destroys the opposition. Exodus 14:14. 13:14. Israel trapped at the Red Sea. Egyptian chariots approaching. No escape. Moses tells the people, "The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." Not, "The Lord will help you fight." Not, "The Lord will strengthen you for battle." The Lord will fight. You are still. Watch. Witness. But the fighting? That's God's job. And God parts the sea. Israel walks through. Egypt follows. God closes the water. Victory without Israel firing an arrow. The pattern is consistent. Every time God's people face impossible odds, every time the situation looks hopeless, every time human capability is insufficient, God intervenes. Personally, decisively, overwhelmingly. He does it to demonstrate his power, to prove his faithfulness, to show that salvation belongs to him alone, not to human strength. And that's exactly what he'll do at Armageddon. Not as a new strategy, as the fulfillment of a pattern he's demonstrated throughout history. Ezekiel 38-39, Supernatural Destruction of Gog's Coalition. We discussed Russia's invasion earlier, but we need to understand how it ends, because this is the clearest picture in Scripture of divine military intervention in the end times. Ezekiel chapter 38, 18-23 describes it in detail. This is what will happen in that day. When Gog attacks the land of Israel, my hot anger will be aroused, declares the sovereign Lord. In my zeal and fiery wrath, I declare that at that time there shall be a great earthquake in the land of Israel. Earthquake, not natural geological activity, divine shaking. The entire region convulses. Troops can't stand. Vehicles overturn. Supply lines collapse. Communication fails. Before a shot is fired, the invading force is in chaos. The fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, the beasts of the field, every creature that moves along the ground, and all the people on the face of the earth will tremble at my presence. God's presence, not distant, not abstract, present, on the battlefield, manifesting with such power that creation itself reacts. Every living thing trembles, not from fear of Russian troops, fear of God. The mountains will be overturned, the cliffs will crumble, and every wall will fall to the ground. Terrain changes. The geography shifts. Mountains collapse. Fortifications crumble. Every defensive position becomes useless. Every strategic high ground disappears. The battlefield itself is reformed by divine power. I will summon a sword against Gog on all my hills, declares the sovereign Lord. Every man's sword will be against his brother. Confusion. Friendly fire. Coalition forces attacking each other. Radio chatter in multiple languages, Russian, Farsi, Turkish, Arabic. Orders contradicting. Chaos spreading. Units firing on each other in the confusion. You've seen the fog of war, battle chaos, friendly fire incidents. Now imagine God deliberately creating that confusion across an entire army spanning multiple nations. Command and control collapses. The coalition destroys itself. I will execute judgment on him with plague and bloodshed. I will pour down torrents of rain, hailstones, and burning sulfur on him and on his troops, and on the many nations with him. Divine weapons. Plague, biological warfare from heaven, bloodshed, supernatural slaughter, torrential rain, drowning, hypothermia, vehicles stuck in mud, hailstones, artillery from the sky, burning sulfur, fire from above, like Sodom and Gomorrah. This is combined arms warfare, multiple attack vectors, overwhelming force, no defense possible, no retreat available, complete annihilation. Ezekiel 39:4-6 gives the result. On the mountains of Israel you will fall, you and all your troops and the nations with you. I will give you food to all kinds of carrion birds and to the wild animals. You will fall in the open field. I will send fire on Magog and on those who live in safety in the coastlands. Total destruction. Not just the invading forces. Fire on Magog itself, Russia's homeland. Cities destroyed. Those who live in safety in the coastlands, possibly Europe, possibly coastal nations that supported the invasion. Divine judgment extends beyond the battlefield. Ezekiel chapter 39:12 says it takes 7 months to bury the dead. 7 months. That's not burying a few thousand. That's industrial-scale mass graves for millions of casualties. This isn't a metaphor. This is military reality written 2,600 years in advance. Armageddon, the ultimate supernatural battle. Ezekiel 38-39 describes one supernatural intervention. But Armageddon, Revelation 16:16, is the final one. The battle that ends all battles. And it makes Gog's destruction look small. Revelation 19:11-16 describes Christ's return. I saw heaven standing open, and there before me was a white horse, whose rider is called Faithful and True. With justice he judges and wages war. Wages war. Not brings peace, not establish his kingdom peacefully. He wages war. Military terminology. Combat operations. This is Jesus as Commander-in-Chief. His eyes are like blazing fire, and on his head are many crowns. You've seen what blazing fire does to enemies. Now imagine eyes that burn with righteous fury, looking at every enemy, seeing every thought, knowing every intention. No hiding, no escape. He has a name written on him that no one knows but he himself. He is dressed in a robe dipped in blood. Blood on his robe. Not his own blood from the cross. Enemy blood. This is the judge executing judgment. The warrior who has already won standing over defeated foes. The armies of heaven were following him, riding on white horses and dressed in fine linen, white and clean. Heaven's armies, angels, possibly raptured saints returning with him, Michael the archangel leading angelic forces, Gabriel, warrior angels who've been held back for centuries, finally released for battle. You've seen combined forces operations, NATO coalitions, allied armies working together. This is the ultimate combined force, perfect coordination. absolute discipline, zero casualties, complete victory guaranteed. Coming out of his mouth is a sharp sword with which to strike down the nations. The sword from his mouth. Not a physical weapon, his word. Hebrews 4:12 says, "The word of God is alive and powerful, sharper than any double-edged sword." He speaks, enemies die. No bullets, no missiles, no bombs. Just the word of God, executing judgment. Revelation 19:15 continues, "He treads the winepress of the fury of the wrath of God Almighty." Winepress imagery. Isaiah 63 describes this. The warrior with garments stained red, not from wine, from blood, treading out judgment like grapes in a press. The fury, not annoyance, not displeasure. Fury of God's wrath. On his robe and on his thigh, he has this name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Ultimate authority. Every earthly king bows, every military commander surrenders, every general's strategy fails, because the King of all kings has arrived, and his authority is absolute. The aftermath. Revelation 19:17-18 describes the cleanup. "And I saw an angel standing in the sun, who cried in a loud voice to all the birds flying in midair, 'Come, gather together for the great supper of God, so that you may eat the flesh of kings, generals, and the mighty, of horses and their riders, and the flesh of all people, free and slave, great and small.'" Carrion birds. Vultures, ravens, birds of prey, summoned to feast on the dead. Not a few bodies, millions. So many that birds are called from across the region to dispose of the carnage. Kings, generals, the mighty, horses and riders. All people, free and slave, great and small. Everyone who stood against Christ. Everyone who took the mark. Everyone who followed the Antichrist. Dead. Revelation 19:21 gives the final count. The rest were killed with the sword coming out of the mouth of the rider on the horse, and all the birds gorged themselves on their flesh. All the birds gorged themselves. Unlimited food supply, flesh everywhere. The battlefield stretching for miles. This isn't a battle. It's an execution, a slaughter, divine judgment enacted militarily. What veterans understand, those of you who've seen combat, you know what battlefields look like afterward. The destruction, the bodies, the smell. The silence after the shooting stops. The eerie quiet was broken only by wounded crying and equipment burning. Now multiply that by millions. Stretch it across hundreds of square miles. Understand that this isn't two human armies fighting to a bloody conclusion. This is the creator of the universe destroying his rebellious creatures with the same ease you'd destroy insects. That's not cruel. That's justice. These are enemies who've rejected every opportunity for mercy, who've murdered believers, who've worshipped the Antichrist, who's taken the mark knowing full well what it meant. This is the righteous judgment they earned and chose, and it's executed so quickly, so decisively, so overwhelmingly that there's no real battle. The armies gather. Christ appears. The armies die. Battle over. Revelation 19:19-20 says the beast and false prophet are captured alive and thrown into the lake of fire. Not killed, not given trials, just seized and damned immediately. Their followers were killed. Their system was destroyed. Their rebellion ended. The response. Zechariah 14:12 describes what happens to those who fight against Jerusalem. This is the plague with which the Lord will strike all the nations that fought against Jerusalem. Their flesh will rot while they are still standing on their feet. Their eyes will rot in their sockets, and their tongues will rot in their mouths. Instant decay. Flesh rotting off bones while still alive, eyes dissolving in sockets, tongues liquefying in mouths. Horror beyond description, agony beyond measure, and it happens to entire armies simultaneously. This sounds like a nuclear weapon effect. Flash burns, radiation sickness, instant tissue destruction. But it's not nuclear. It's divine. God's wrath manifested as physical judgment. Your response to this: how does understanding divine military intervention affect you? First, it humbles you. You've seen what human weapons can do. Now you understand what divine weapons do. All your military experience, all your tactical knowledge, all your combat skill, worthless against God. If He decides to fight, you surrender or die. No third option. Second, it encourages you. God fights for His people. When you're overwhelmed, when odds are impossible, when human strength fails, God intervenes. You're not alone. You're not abandoned. The armies of heaven stand ready. Third, it puts tribulation in perspective. Yes, persecution is coming. Yes, martyrdom is real. Yes, many will die. But the enemy's victory is temporary. The Antichrist's power is limited. Christ's return ends it all instantly. Fourth, it informs your prayers. Pray for divine intervention. Pray for angelic protection. Pray for God to fight for His people as He's fought throughout history. Those aren't vague spiritual prayers. They're requests for military action from heaven's forces. Fifth, it settles your fear. What are you afraid of? Death? You'll die eventually anyway. Persecution? It's temporary. Suffering? It is refined. The Antichrist? Christ destroys him with a word. Demons? Angels outnumber them. What can man do to you when God fights for you? Psalm 118:6 declares, "The Lord is with me, I will not be afraid. What can mere mortals do to me?" Sixth, it gives you confidence to refuse the mark. Yes, refusing means persecution, but accepting means facing the wrath described in Revelation 19. Better to suffer temporarily under the Antichrist than eternally under Christ's judgment. Seventh, it reframes martyrdom. If you die refusing the mark, you're not losing. You're winning, escaping tribulation's worst horrors, receiving immediate reward, avoiding the battles described in Revelation 19, and reigning with Christ for 1,000 years. The supernatural element isn't just a nice theological point. It's a strategic military reality. God has armies. God has weapons. God has a battle plan. And when He executes it, no human force can resist. You've fought human enemies. Some of you have seen friends die in combat. You've experienced the worst humanity can inflict. But you've never faced divine judgment. And when Christ returns as warrior king, every enemy who thought they were strong discovers what real power looks like. The question is, which side are you on when that happens? Because the armies are gathering. Armageddon is being prepared. The stage is set for the final battle. And when heaven's forces mobilize, when Christ appears on the white horse, when the sword comes from His mouth, it won't matter how many troops the Antichrist commands. It won't matter how advanced his weapons are. It won't matter how many nations he controls. One word from Christ, and they're all dead. That's not hyperbole. That's Revelation 19:21. And it's coming. Are you ready to face the warrior king? Not as an enemy, but as an ally. Not under judgment, but under grace. Not destroyed by the sword from his mouth, but protected by the blood from his cross. That's the choice. And the time to make it isn't when he appears. It's now, before the mark, before the tribulation, before the final battle that ends all battles and establishes the kingdom that will never fall. Megiddo, a small town in northern Israel, 20 miles southeast of Haifa, overlooking the Jezreel Valley. You can visit it today, walk the ancient ruins, stand on the Tell, the mound of civilizations built one on top of another. Look out over the valley and see exactly where the final battle of human history will take place. It's not theoretical, not symbolic, not some spiritual concept divorced from geography. Armageddon is a real place where real armies will gather for a real battle. And you, sitting there at 65, 70, 75 years old, you might live to see it. Not read about it in history books, not hear stories from survivors, actually witness it. The final confrontation between human rebellion and divine authority. The moment when Jesus Christ returns not as a suffering servant, but as a conquering king. Think about that. Your generation has seen Israel reborn. You've watched prophecy fulfill. You've witnessed the impossible become reality. And now you're approaching the age where, if the timeline accelerates as signs suggest, you could see the most significant event since the crucifixion, the return of the King at Armageddon. And this time, he's coming to fight. The location. Why Megiddo? Throughout history, Megiddo has been a strategic military site. The valley provides natural routes between the Mediterranean coast and the Jordan Valley, between Egypt and Mesopotamia. Control Megiddo, control the region. Over 200 battles have been fought there. Pharaoh Thutmose III fought there in 1457 BC. Deborah and Barak defeated Sisera there. King Josiah died fighting there in 609 BC. General Allenby defeated the Turks there in 1918 during World War I. The valley is flat, wide, perfect for massing troops. Ancient armies fought there because terrain favored large-scale combat. Modern armies would choose it for the same reason. But God chose it for different reasons. Historical symbolism, geographic centrality, and demonstration of his sovereignty over the place where his enemies thought they'd won. Revelation 16:16 names it specifically. Then they gathered the kings together to the place that in Hebrew is called Armageddon. Armageddon, Har Megiddo in Hebrew, the mountain of Megiddo, not just the valley. The entire region, the gathering point for the armies of the world. The gathering, how do they all get there? Revelation 16:12-14 describes the process. The sixth angel poured out his bowl on the great river Euphrates, and its water was dried up to prepare the way for the kings from the east. Then I saw 3 impure spirits that looked like frogs. They came out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet. They are demonic spirits that perform signs, and they go out to the kings of the whole world, to gather them for the battle on the great day of God Almighty. Demonic influence. And these kings don't gather because it makes strategic sense. They gather because they're being supernaturally compelled. Demons performing signs, deceiving world leaders. Creating the conditions that drive every nation toward Israel. From a human perspective, each nation will have its own reasons. The Northern Coalition, Russia and allies, invade to plunder Israel's wealth and eliminate Western influence. The Southern Forces, Islamic coalition, attacks to destroy Israel and oppose the Antichrist's blasphemy. The Eastern Army, China, India, Asian powers, mobilized to challenge Western dominance and secure their own position in the new order. European forces, under Antichrist control, move to defend his interests and crush opposition. But from heaven's perspective, they are all being gathered, drawn to the slaughter, brought to the place where God will demonstrate his power and execute judgment on rebellious humanity. The timing. When does it happen? Revelation 16:16 is the sixth bowl judgment, near the very end of the tribulation. After the seal judgments, after the trumpet judgments, after most of the bowl judgments, right before Christ's return. The sequence seems to be early tribulation, Antichrist rises, make a covenant with Israel, consolidates power. The world experiences relative peace compared to what's coming. Mid-tribulation, abomination of desolation, Antichrist reveals true nature. Persecution intensifies. Mark of the beast implemented. Russia invades and is destroyed. Ezekiel 38-39. Late tribulation, chaos, multiple fronts. Islamic forces attack. Eastern kings mobilize. Natural disasters intensify. Society collapses. Bowl judgments pour out God's wrath. Final moments. All armies converge on Israel. Jerusalem is surrounded, Israel facing annihilation. Antichrist thinking he's won. Then Christ returns. Daniel chapter 11, 44-45 describes the Antichrist's final movements. But reports from the east and the north will alarm him, and he will set out in a great rage to destroy and annihilate many. He will pitch his royal tents between the seas at the beautiful holy mountain. Between the seas, Mediterranean and Dead Sea, at the beautiful holy mountain, Jerusalem. The Antichrist sets up headquarters in Jerusalem, exactly where Jesus was crucified. The symbolism is deliberate. Satan's man sitting where God's Son died. The scope. How many troops? Joel 3:2 says, I will gather all nations and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat. All nations, not most, not the major powers, all. Every nation on earth contributes to this final battle, some willingly, some unwillingly, some knowingly, some were deceived, but all present. Revelation 9:16 mentions 200 million from the east alone. Add Russia's coalition, Islamic forces, European armies under Antichrist control, African nations, Western Hemisphere nations. The total could be 300-400 million soldiers or more. The largest army ever assembled, equipped with the most advanced weapons humanity has developed: nuclear, biological, chemical, conventional, cyber, electronic warfare, everything. And it's all worthless when heaven's armies arrive. The battle. What actually happens? Zechariah 14:1-5 gives the ground-level view. A day of the Lord is coming, Jerusalem, when your possessions will be plundered and divided up within your very walls. I will gather all the nations to Jerusalem to fight against it. The city will be captured, the houses ransacked, and the women raped. Half of the city will go into exile, but the rest of the people will not be taken from the city. Jerusalem falls. The IDF fights heroically but is overwhelmed. Half the city captured. Urban warfare, house to house. Atrocities committed. It looks like the end for Israel. Like the Antichrist has finally accomplished what Hitler, Pharaoh, and Babylon couldn't: the complete destruction of God's chosen people. But verse 3, "Then the Lord will go out and fight against those nations. As he fights on a day of battle, God enters the battle, not as a distant observer, not as a spiritual presence. Physically, personally, the Lord fights as he fights on a day of battle." Military terminology: combat operations, divine warfare. Verse 4, "On that day his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, east of Jerusalem, and the Mount of Olives will be split in two from east to west, forming a great valley, with half of the mountain moving north and half moving south." Christ's feet touch earth. The Mount of Olives, where he ascended 2,000 years ago. He returns to the exact same spot. Acts 1:11 predicted it. This same Jesus, who has been taken from you into heaven, will come back in the same way you have seen him go into heaven. And when his feet touch down, the mountain splits. Literally, geologically, a massive earthquake creating a valley. Not symbolic. Actual terrain change visible from space. The geography of Jerusalem permanently altered by Christ's return. Verse 5, "You will flee by my mountain valley, for it will extend to Azel. You will flee as you fled from the earthquake in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah. Then the Lord my God will come, and all the holy ones with him." Escape route created. The valley provides a way for Jerusalem's surviving remnant to escape the city. Divine urban planning. Geological engineering executed by divine power to save his people. And he comes with all the holy ones. Angels. Raptured saints. The armies of heaven. Every believer who died in faith. Every martyr who refused the mark, returning with Christ to witness his victory. The slaughter. Revelation 14:20 gives the horrifying scale. They were trampled in the winepress outside the city, and blood flowed out of the press, rising as high as the horses' bridles for a distance of 1,600 stadia. Blood rising to horses' bridles, about 4 feet deep. For 1,600 stadia, approximately 180 miles. That's the length of Israel from north to south. Some interpret this literally. Others have hyperbolic imagery. But either way, the message is clear. Casualties on a scale humanity has never witnessed. Not just soldiers. Revelation 19:18 says birds feast on the flesh of kings, generals, and the mighty, of horses and their riders, and the flesh of all people, free and slave, great and small. All people. Everyone who gathered at Armageddon, everyone who took the mark, everyone who followed the Antichrist. Dead. Zechariah 14:12 describes the method. This is the plague with which the Lord will strike all the nations that fought against Jerusalem. Their flesh will rot while they are still standing on their feet. Their eyes will rot in their sockets, and their tongues will rot in their mouths. Instant decomposition. Flesh rotting off living bodies. Eyes liquefying. Tongues disintegrating. Horror movie imagery. But this is prophetic reality. Divine judgment executed on God's enemies. Some suggest this sounds like nuclear weapon effects. Others point to direct divine plague. Regardless, the result is the same. Millions dying simultaneously in the most horrific way imaginable. The duration. How long does the battle last? Revelation doesn't say explicitly, but given the descriptions, it could be hours. Christ appears. Enemies recognize who he is. They attempt to fight. He speaks. They die, battle over. Minutes. Even faster. The sword from his mouth destroys instantly. No prolonged combat. Just execution. Instant. Revelation 19:21 says, "The rest were killed with the sword coming out of the mouth of the rider on the horse." One word. All dead. Battle is generous terminology. Slaughter is more accurate. You've seen combat. You know battles last hours, days, sometimes weeks. Armageddon might last seconds. That's how overwhelming Christ's power is. That's how futile human resistance against divine judgment is. The aftermath. Ezekiel 39:9-10 describes cleanup after the earlier Gog invasion. And similar applies to Armageddon. Then those who live in the towns of Israel will go out and use the weapons for fuel and burn them up. The small and large shields, the bows and arrows, the war clubs and spears. For 7 years, they will use them for fuel. 7 years burning weapons. Advanced military hardware, vehicles, equipment. So much material that it provides fuel for 7 years. The detritus of human rebellion against God provides energy for the millennial kingdom. Ezekiel 39:11-12. On that day I will give Gog a burial place in Israel, in the valley of those who travel east of the sea. It will block the way of travelers, because Gog and all his hordes will be buried there. For 7 months, the Israelites will be burying them in order to cleanse the land. 7 months, burying the dead. Industrial-scale burial operations. Teams assigned. Professional burial details. The sheer number of casualties requiring over half a year to dispose of properly. Revelation 19:17-18 adds the gruesome detail. Birds summoned to feast on corpses. Natural cleanup crew disposing of flesh. The valley of Megiddo becomes a charnel house, a monument to the cost of rebellion against God. The victory, but for believers, martyrs resurrected, survivors protected, saints returning with Christ. This isn't horror, it's vindication. Every injustice avenged, every martyrdom is honored, every tear wiped away, every enemy defeated, every promise was fulfilled. Revelation 19:1-2 describes heaven's response. Hallelujah! Salvation and glory and power belong to our God, for true and just are his judgments. He has condemned the great prostitute who corrupted the earth by her adulteries. He has avenged on her the blood of his servants. Justice. Finally, completely, permanently. The wicked punished, the righteous rewarded. The books are balanced, the accounts settled, and Christ establishes his kingdom, not through democratic process, not through negotiation, through conquest, through absolute victory, through demonstrating that every knee will bow, willingly or unwillingly, to the King of Kings. What this means for you. You're reading this at 65, 70, 75 plus years old. Average male life expectancy in America is about 76 years. You're near the end of your natural life. But what if you don't die naturally? What if you live to see the tribulation? What if you're alive when Armageddon happens? It's possible. Israel was reborn when your parents were young. The pieces are moving into position now. The timeline could accelerate rapidly. If you're 70 today and live to 85, that's 15 years. Enough time for the Antichrist to rise, the covenant to be signed, the 7-year tribulation to run its course, and Armageddon to occur. You might see this, not as distant a prophecy, as lived reality. How does that change how you live today? First, it creates urgency. You don't have time to waste. Every day matters. Every conversation with grandchildren is critical. Every prayer counts. You're preparing a generation for events you might witness yourself. Second, it removes fear of death. If you die before Armageddon, you escape tribulation's worst horrors. If you live through it, you see Christ return. Either way, you win. Third, it puts current events in perspective. Political chaos, economic uncertainty, cultural decay, all of it is setting the stage for what's coming. Don't panic. It's prophesied, expected, part of the plan. Fourth, it motivates faithfulness. You might face the Mark decision. You might have to choose between survival and salvation. Settle that now, before pressure, before fear. Decide today that you'll refuse the mark no matter what. Fifth, it gives hope. The story doesn't end with Antichrist victory. It ends with Christ's triumph. Armageddon isn't the final chapter. It's the second to last. The final chapter is the kingdom, peace, righteousness, Christ reigning. You are potentially reigning with Him, as Revelation 24 promises. I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded because of their testimony about Jesus and because of the Word of God. They had not worshipped the beast or its image, and had not received its mark on their foreheads or their hands. They came to life and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. Reigned with Christ. Not just survived, reigned, ruled, given authority in the millennial kingdom. That's the reward for refusing the mark. That's what awaits those who stand firm. Sixth, it refocuses priorities. What matters? Not comfort, not retirement savings, not earthly security. What matters is being right with God, preparing your family, standing firm when tested, and if possible, seeing Christ return. Imagine it. You're there, in Jerusalem, or watching from wherever you are. The sky opens. You see Him, the one you've believed in for decades, the one you've prayed to, the one you've served, coming in power and glory. Your whole life, all the struggles, all the doubts, all the persecution, vindicated in an instant. You see Him destroy His enemies, establish His kingdom, fulfill every promise. And you're there, witnessing it. That's not fantasy. That's a biblical prophecy. And you're the generation that might see it. But even if you don't, even if you die before it happens, you've played your part, prepared the next generation, modeled faithfulness, stood firm, and when you're resurrected, you'll return with Him to witness Armageddon from heaven's perspective. The battle is coming, the King is returning, and the victory is certain. The only question is whether you'll be on the winning side, not as an enemy destroyed at Armageddon, but as a saint returning with Christ, as a warrior in heaven's army, as witness to the greatest military victory in history. Because when the armies gather, when Jerusalem falls, when it looks like the end, that's when the King arrives. That's when hope becomes sight. That's when faith becomes victory. And every veteran who served earthly nations will finally serve under the ultimate commander. Every soldier who fought earthly battles will witness the ultimate battle. Every warrior who knew combat will see warfare perfected. The final battle is coming, and it will be glorious, terrifying for God's enemies, vindicating for his people, and permanent in its results. Armageddon isn't the end. It's the beginning of the kingdom that never falls. And you, aging warrior, faithful veteran, surviving saint, you might just live to see it. Or die and return for it, or reign in it. Either way, you win, because the Lamb overcomes, and those with him are called, chosen, and faithful. The question is, are you? Because everything, your entire life, all your service, or all your faithfulness, is building toward that moment when Christ returns, and every enemy falls, and the kingdom begins. And that moment is closer than most people think, closer than the news reports, closer than politicians understand, close enough that you might actually be there when heaven invades earth and the King takes his throne. So prepare, stand firm, refuse compromise, and watch, because the signs are accelerating. The pieces are moving, and the final battle approaches. And when it comes, when you see the sky open and the King descend, you'll know it was all real, all true, all worth it. Every sacrifice, every struggle, every moment of faithfulness, vindicated, rewarded, eternally. The battle is coming, but so is the victory. And you, if you stand firm, will be part of it, not as casualty, but as overcomer, not destroyed at Armageddon, but reigning after it. That's the promise, that's the hope, that's what's coming. Are you ready? Because after Armageddon, after the King returns, after every enemy is defeated, then comes the assignment. Your mission. What aging warriors do in the time that remains before that trumpet sounds, and that sky opens, and everything changes forever. You've read 9 sections. You understand the prophetic landscape. Russia mobilizing in the north, Islamic forces gathering in the south, China's 200 million from the east, Israel at the center, heading toward covenant and betrayal, America's uncertain fate, the underground resistance, divine intervention, and Armageddon, the final battle you might actually witness. Now comes the hard question. What do you do? You're 65, 70, 75, maybe older. Your body isn't what it was at 25. Your knees hurt. Your back aches. You can't run like you used to. You can't fight like you trained to. The physical capabilities that defined your military service are fading or gone. But here's what hasn't faded. Your mind, your experience, your discipline, your courage, and your faith. And in the spiritual warfare that's already raging, the battle that will intensify until Christ returns, those qualities matter more than physical strength. Age is not a disqualification, it's a qualification. Because what's coming requires wisdom, endurance, and the kind of fearlessness that only comes from living long enough to know what really matters. You're not done. You're not irrelevant. You're not on the bench. You're a veteran being called for one final mission, the most important mission of your life. And unlike your military service, this mission's success determines where your children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren spend eternity. Let me give you your orders, your battle station, your assignment for whatever time you have left. Mission 1. Settle your own allegiance. Before you can prepare anyone else, you need to be certain where you stand. Not theoretically Christian, not culturally religious, not nominally believing, but genuinely, personally, eternally settled with Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior. Romans chapter 10 says, "If you declare with your mouth, Jesus is Lord about, and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved." 2 parts. Declaration: Jesus is Lord, not just Savior. Lord means master, commander, the one with absolute authority over your life. And belief in the resurrection. The historical fact that Jesus died, was buried, and rose bodily from the grave. If you can't affirm both with certainty, settle it now. Not tomorrow, not after you finish this video. Now. Because everything else depends on this foundation. Your eternity, your family's preparation, your spiritual authority to teach and warn others. If you've drifted, if you've been lukewarm, if you've called yourself Christian while living like the world. Repent. Turn back. Confess. Recommit. You don't have time to waste living compromised. The tribulation is coming. The mark will be mandatory, and lukewarm Christians will take it to save their comfort. Don't be one of them. Settle this now. All in, completely surrendered. Jesus is Lord. Period. Mission 2. Prepare your family. Your grandchildren are growing up in a world you don't recognize. Schools teaching gender confusion. Media celebrating perversion. Government normalizing tyranny. Churches preaching everything except the gospel. They're being conditioned to take the mark, to accept digital currency, to trust government surveillance, to believe convenience matters more than freedom, to surrender privacy for security. And unless someone teaches them differently, they'll comply. They'll take the mark. They'll worship the beast. And they'll be damned eternally. That someone is you. Teach them Scripture. Not Bible stories for entertainment. The Word of God for survival. Philippians 9-11. Revelation 13. Matthew 24. The passages that explain what's coming and how to recognize it. Make them memorize key verses. Not for Sunday school gold stars. For tribulation survival when they don't have access to Bibles. Teach them discernment. How to identify false teaching. How to recognize deception. How to test spirits. 1 John chapter 4, 1-3. They need to know the real Jesus so they can spot the counterfeit Antichrist. Teach them sacrifice. Take them camping without phones. Make them go a day without electronics. Train them to function when comfortable systems fail. Not survivalist paranoia. Practical preparation for when digital dependency becomes digital enslavement. Teach them courage. Tell them your military stories. Not the glory parts, the scary parts. When you were afraid but did your duty anyway. When you faced death but stood firm. They need to know courage isn't absence of fear. It's faithfulness despite fear. Teach them about the mark. Explicitly. Don't dance around it. Show them Revelation 13 and 14. Explain what taking the mark means. Eternal damnation. No second chances. Make absolutely certain they understand this isn't negotiable. Write letters. To be opened when the covenant is signed, when the Antichrist is revealed, when the mark becomes mandatory. Letters where you, in your own handwriting, remind them what you taught them. Beg them to refuse. Promise to see them in eternity if they stand firm. You won't be here to guide them through the tribulation. But your words can be. Your teaching can be. Your example can be. Mission 3. Mentor younger men. You've lived 65, 70, 75 plus years. You've seen things, learned lessons, made mistakes, and suffered consequences. All that experience is valuable, especially to younger men who haven't lived long enough to develop wisdom. Find younger believers, men in their 30s, 40s, 50s, the ones who'll be in their prime when tribulation hits, the ones who'll face the physical challenges you can't anymore. Teach them what you know, not just biblical knowledge, practical wisdom. Teach them about authority. You served in the military hierarchy. You understand the chain of command. Teach them about submitting to legitimate authority while resisting illegitimate demands. Romans 13 verses Acts 14. When to obey government and when to obey God instead. Teach them about endurance. You've lived through hardship, economic struggles, health problems, loss. You know how to keep going when circumstances are terrible. That's exactly what tribulation will require. Teach them about brotherhood. Military units survive through bonds between men. Tribulation believers will survive the same way. Underground networks, trust relationships. Men who'll risk their lives for each other because they've built bonds strong enough to endure persecution. Teach them about leadership. You've seen good leaders and bad leaders. You know what works and what doesn't. These younger men will lead resistance movements, underground churches, and refugee groups. They need to know how to lead under pressure. Teach them about weapons, if appropriate. Some will face situations requiring physical defense. You have expertise. Constitutional right to bear arms exists for moments when tyranny requires resistance. Teach responsible ownership, proper use, and biblical framework for when violence is justified versus when martyrdom is required. You're not training terrorists. You're preparing men who might need to defend their families when the government becomes the enemy. That's biblical. Nehemiah rebuilt walls with weapons in hand. There's a time for every purpose under heaven, including a time for war. Mission number 4. Wage spiritual warfare. This is your primary assignment, the battle you're most qualified for, the mission that doesn't require physical capability but spiritual maturity. Ephesians 6:12. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Pray, not casual prayers, warfare prayers, strategic intercession. Pray for your family by name, each grandchild, each child. Specific prayers for their protection, their faith, their refusal of the mark. Pray for the church, the true believers who will face persecution. The underground networks are forming now. The martyrs who will refuse compromise. Pray for Israel. Genesis 12:3 still applies. Pray for their protection, their recognition of the Messiah, their survival through Jacob's trouble. Pray against the enemy, Satan, demons, the spirit of Antichrist already at work. You're not fighting flesh and blood. You're fighting spiritual forces, and prayer is your weapon. Fast, if your health allows. Daniel fasted and received revelation. Esther fasted before confronting evil. Fasting isn't magic, but it focuses attention and demonstrates seriousness to God. Study, not just surface reading, deep study of prophecy, of God's character, of His faithfulness throughout history. The more you know Him, the more confident you'll be when everything else fails. Worship. 2 Chronicles 20, Jehoshaphat faced impossible odds. He put worshippers at the front of the army. God fought for them. Worship is warfare. It declares God's sovereignty when circumstances scream defeat. Mission number 5. Divest from Babylon. Revelation 18:4. Come out of her, my people, so that you will not share in her sins, so that you will not receive any of her plagues. Babylon, the world system, the economic, political, cultural structure that will become the beast's kingdom. You need to start separating from it now. Financially, don't trust your retirement entirely to market systems. Diversify. Have cash on hand. Precious metals if possible. Not because you're building an earthly kingdom, because you're preparing for when digital systems require the mark to access. Culturally, stop consuming Babylon's entertainment, Hollywood's filth, music that celebrates sin, media that programs minds for compliance. You're feeding your soul poison. Stop. Politically, don't put your hope in elections. Voting is fine. Supporting righteous candidates is good. But your ultimate hope isn't in Washington. It's in New Jerusalem. Keep perspective. Ecclesiastically, if your church has compromised, accepting homosexuality, denying biblical authority, preaching prosperity instead of gospel, leave. Find a faithful remnant, or gather with 2 or 3 in your home. Better a small group that believes truth than a large church that teaches lies. Mission number 6. Finish strong. 2 Timothy 4:7. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Paul wrote that from prison, awaiting execution. Old, tired, abandoned by most supporters. But I'm confident, because he finished. He didn't quit. He didn't compromise. He kept fighting until there was no fight left. That's your assignment. Finish strong. Don't retire from faith. You might be retired from work, but you're not retired from the kingdom. You serve until you die. That's the deal. Don't compromise in your final years. Some men stay strong for decades, then cave at the end. I want comfort. Avoiding conflict, making peace with culture to have ease. Don't be that man. Don't waste time. You don't have decades left, maybe years, maybe months. Every day matters. Every conversation counts. Every prayer is critical. Don't fear death. You're closer to it than most people. That's not depressing. That's liberating. You have less to lose, less to fear, more reason to speak truth, regardless of consequences. Do leave a legacy. Not money, not property. Legacy of faith, of courage, of faithfulness. So when you're gone, your family remembers how you lived, what you stood for, that you refused to compromise even when it cost you. Mission 7. Watch. Matthew 24:42. Therefore keep watch, because you do not know on what day your Lord will come. Watch the signs. Track the developments. Not obsessively, not fearfully, but alertly. When the covenant is signed with Israel, recognize it. When the temple is rebuilt, understand what it means. When the Antichrist is revealed, identify him. When the mark is implemented, refuse it. You're a watchman. Ezekiel 33:6. But if the watchman sees the sword coming and does not blow the trumpet to warn the people, and the sword comes and takes someone's life, that person's life will be taken because of their sin. But I will hold the watchman accountable for their blood. You've been warned. Now warn others. Blow the trumpet. Sound the alarm. Don't let anyone say they didn't know. The final reality. You're an aging warrior. Your battles aren't over. They're just different now. Not physical combat, spiritual warfare, not defeating human enemies, preparing your family for the ultimate spiritual test. Not serving earthly nations, serving the kingdom that never falls. And here's what you need to understand. This mission matters more than every other mission you've ever had. Your military service was important. You defended freedom, protected the innocent, served honorably, but that service secured temporary earthly freedom. This service secures eternal spiritual salvation. The stakes have never been higher. The enemy has never been more dangerous. The consequences have never been more permanent. But the victory has never been more certain. Because the commander you serve has already won. The battle was decided at the cross. The resurrection proved it. And his return will consummate it. You're not fighting for victory. You're fighting from victory. Christ won. You're just cleaning up the remaining resistance until he returns to claim what's his. So stand your post. Man your battle station. Execute your orders. And when the trumpet sounds, when the sky opens, when the King returns, you'll stand before him, not ashamed, not compromised, not defeated, but faithful, obedient, victorious. The nations are positioning. Russia, China, Islam, Israel, all moving into place for the final confrontation. The Antichrist is coming. The mark will be mandatory. The tribulation will test every soul. But you're ready. You've settled your allegiance. You've prepared your family. You've fought the good fight, and you're finishing strong. The question isn't whether you'll see Christ return. It's whether he'll find you faithful when he does. And based on everything you've learned, everything you've committed to, everything you're doing right now in response to this message, you will be faithful, watchful, ready. The aging warrior on his final mission. The veteran of earthly battles preparing for spiritual war. The grandfather leaves a legacy that outlasts nations. That's who you are. That's your assignment. That's your battle station. Now, man it. Until the trumpet sounds, until the sky opens, until the King you've served faithfully for decades finally appears and says those words every warrior longs to hear. Well done, good and faithful servant. That's your mission. That's your future. That's what's coming. The nations will stand against the Antichrist. Some for righteous reasons, others for selfish ones. All will fail without divine intervention. But you're not standing against the Antichrist with human strength. You're standing for Christ with divine power. And when that final battle comes, when Armageddon erupts, when it all comes down to the moment of truth, you'll be on the winning side. Not because you were strong enough, but because he is. Not because you deserved it, but because he's faithful. And every enemy that thought they'd won, every power that thought they'd conquered, every system that thought it controlled the world, they'll all fall in an instant, in a word. When the King returns, and the sword comes from his mouth, and every knee bows, and every tongue confesses that Jesus Christ is Lord. You've lived to see Israel reborn. You might live to see Christ return. And everything between now and then, every day, every decision, every act of faithfulness is preparing you and your family for that moment when hope becomes sight and faith becomes victory. And the battle that's raged for 6,000 years. Finally, you served your country. You stood on the wall. You defended freedom when it actually meant something. You watched America go from one nation under God to a nation that kicks God out of schools, celebrates perversion, and calls good evil and evil good. And now, as you study biblical prophecy with the urgency that comes from knowing your time on earth is limited, you're asking the question that haunts every patriot who's lived long enough to see the decline. Where is America when the Antichrist rises to power? The silence from prophecy teachers is deafening. They'll tell you about Russia, China, and Israel. They'll map out Ezekiel 38 and Revelation 16. But when you ask about the nation you fought for, the nation you pledged allegiance to, the nation that was supposed to be a city on a hill, they change the subject. I won't, because you deserve the truth. And the truth is more devastating and more urgent than most pastors have the courage to tell you. Right now, at this very moment, the final pieces are being positioned for a war that makes World War II look like a border skirmish. Moscow is building the exact coalition Ezekiel described 1,600 years ago. Beijing is mobilizing an army so massive that Revelation gives us the specific number, 200 million troops. The Middle East is one match strike from exploding into the war that ends all wars. And America? America is either about to collapse before the tribulation begins, be absorbed into the Antichrist's global government, or play a role so minor that Scripture doesn't even bother mentioning it by name. You didn't fight in Vietnam, serve during the Cold War, or stand ready during Desert Storm, so your grandchildren could grow up under the reign of the beast. You didn't defend constitutional freedoms, so the next generation could willingly surrender them for a digital mark on their right hand or forehead. But here's what your military training prepared you for that you didn't realize. This isn't over. The final battle hasn't been fought, and your generation, the last generation that remembers when America was great, when churches were full, when men were men, and truth was truth. You have one last mission, not a physical mission. Most of you can't run to the mountains or fight in the trenches anymore. Your knees are shot, your back hurts. Your doctor has you on medications that didn't even exist when you were young. But spiritual warfare has no age limit. Prayer is more powerful than any weapon you ever carried. And the legacy you leave your grandchildren in the next few years will determine whether they survive what's coming or take the mark and damn themselves for eternity. Let me be blunt about something most prophecy teachers won't say. This video isn't for everyone. It's not for people looking for entertainment. It's not for casual Christians who want their ears tickled. It's not for young people who think they have decades to figure this out. This is for you, the man or woman who's lived long